Howdy, folks. Your host, JJ Vance here, back for another Fridaze, host of Operation GCD, and perhaps more notably, not the vice president. Back for another Fridaze with my co-host, Nick from the Occult Rejects. Nick, how you doing, sir?
What is going on, sir? I'm doing well. And yourself?
Doing fantastic. What's going on at the Occult Rejects this week? Anything you're working on? Anything you've done this week that's fun and or exciting?
I was actually recording today, finally, the audio for Jacob Bohm, the show I'm doing on Jacob Bohm.
Yeah,
so
you were talking about that.
That should hopefully be done this weekend. It probably won't be out for like a month and a half, but next week I do have the first of many solo shows coming out on Robert Flood. I did that on my own. That'll be coming out next week.
And can you remind me who Jacob Bohm is besides the 16th century occultist fellow?
Yeah, I mean, that's really all. I'm covering him on his experience and the books that he wrote. He did get kind of excommunicated from the town that he was in because they were extremely religious, and they ended up coming into I guess a copy of one of his books, and they were like, "Oh, this shit's crazy. You got to go. It's heretical."
Right, and he covers major influence right on later.
Yeah. It's definitely interesting. It will be a lot of these solo shows I'm doing too, they'll be fully, there'll be images on the whole thing. So, I mean, to watch it, you're not going to get stuck looking at my face the whole time. It's actually images, some of them, the books, engravings, but definitely check it out. Something new that I'm trying to do once a month at least, if not twice.
That's awesome. No, that's good stuff. Now, who is this George Floyd fellow? Who was the other guy?
Oh, Robert Flood.
Robert Flood.
Yeah, I covered him. He was really he's another one from the early, I think 1600s. Fuck, I forgot already. I was real big on him. He was into alchemy, but this guy had books back then where he was drawing pictures of the eyes and the brains, and he was talking about it amongst occultism. So I wanted to show that you have somebody from back then even drawing eyes and brains in their books, going on about magic.
No, I think that's a very fascinating aspect you've identified there with all this knowledge of, especially deep knowledge of the anatomy and biology of stuff, within these occult circles at a time when, you wonder where they got that from, right?
Oh, that's what I'm getting at. It's back then, it's unless there was some sort of technology that we don't know of now that's real simple or something advanced that's just been hidden from us, but how were they? I mean, listen, you can be honest, you can cut somebody open and look at it, but I mean, certain things, this guy was drawing detailed stuff of the eyeballs that we're just showing now with microscopes. How did you do that then?
For sure.
Weird. Crystals, glass, what are you doing?
I just want to say what's up there to Landon. How you doing there, good sir? We've had Landon on our recent Fridays. I'm always interested in his, I'm always excited about his interest in some of these older topics from a younger generation. Specifically, some stuff we're going to get into tonight with tonight's guest, regarding some parapolitics and Iran-Contra style activities. So, and how that kind of relates today. But before we get quite there, what else you working on at Occult Rejects? We did a couple shows this week, and I know you dropped the Greg Little one.
Yeah, we got the Greg Little. Yeah,
I recommend folks check out that one. If you're interested in mounds, go listen to that one with Greg Little.
Yeah. You know what's funny? I normally don't ever get bad comments, and I actually got one today. People saying that our science is actually bullshit on that stuff.
Well, tell them I'm not a scientist first and foremost. So
but I mean, it's I don't know. Would you rather have a fantastical story instead of I don't know, whatever? But banger of an episode. I highly suggested. I do know tomorrow we'll be going live with Ryder Lee talking about Virginia Guffey. So that should be
nice. Yeah,
we got.
He's done a good deep dive into that, right? The whole issues around Virginia Guffey, not just her death, but her life, basically.
Yeah, and then we next weekend we have Ed Cassis and the Tridactyl episode coming out. That was definitely an experience.
Oh, that's an exciting one. That's
unfortunately I did edit out his crying. So I mean,
well, that's probably good. It's probably good. No, I enjoyed that one. And Ryder Lee, I always enjoyed conversations with Ryder, the host of Raised by Giants, who's been a guest on here, and we'll be on here again here in the future too, as well on Fridays. But the Ancient Alien Cargo Cults, dude, he's I definitely enjoy that conversation with the man for sure. And again, he does a lot of other great work. But the what was that all on the Occult Rejects? Anything else upcoming next week? Besides your
next week, a lot of the stuff I have. I don't know if you were there, but next week we do have the That Weird and Paranormal of Brittany Barbereri. I'm sorry, I can't remember everybody that's been on the shows. Yep. Remember if I think you're on that one actually.
Me too, right? Yeah. Great conversation. Folks should check out.
Yeah, hell yeah, yeah. That is another thing. I mean, we did have Greg Carwood on recently, the High Side Chats this Monday. So if you haven't heard that, I would definitely go back and check that out. It was an awesome episode. It was pretty fucking cool.
Yes, sir. Not to, I appreciate the comments there. You have anything else for us there, Nick?
No. That's it. I see Lando saying something about just hit trend for some of you boys. Brendan Masteron was always my favorite.
Landon's a character. I like Landon. Good stuff. But so before we get to our guest here, not to belabor the point, I appreciate your plugs there. I got Operation GCD Live Sundays, my new Patreon show, coming up on this Sunday, 8 p.m. Eastern time, and every subsequent Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern time. But taking some deeper dives into some of the true crime and high weirdness incidents that I've experienced in my life and that interest me. Most notably, one I've told this story a little bit on numerous Occult Rejects, and it's the only thing you can do is really try to make humor out of a situation if you feel like you've been cursed by a haunted doll for 12 plus years. But Robert the Doll, that's coming up on Sunday, so I'm going to go into some of the history behind that doll and my interactions with him and who else he's cursed in this damn world. And then we saw my old stalker friend turned seemingly mind control assassin, Buffalo Jared Revisa, there on our, as our normal intro, and that'll be the subsequent Sunday, following Sunday, the legend of Buffalo Jared Revisa. So a fellow who demanded to be my PR rep and would not take no for an answer, and then later went on a transpocalypse multi-state murder spree. And today his court cases, as we've gone over on previous Fridays, are seemingly not in public purview of the court systems. And allegedly he sits today in the Bridgewater Mental Hospital in Massachusetts, awaiting a litany of charges from murder to attempted murders, again, multi-state. But it's weird because the Bridgewater Mental Hospital sits in the middle of the infamous spooky bridge, not spooky, but high weirdness or spooky. I know I use spooky for other terms, but mystical Bridgewater Triangle. If folks are familiar with that, so any further, and I do apologize for belaboring the points thus far, and I appreciate you waiting for us there, sir. Austin Wade Picard, welcome to Fridaze.
Man, I appreciate you guys for having me on, honestly. And by the way, just I think it's very interesting as far as it's kind of hilarious how much. First of all, just the Virginia Guffrey aspect. I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say tomorrow for that interview, because I'm very much skeptical at this moment, just as far as some of the more recent information that's coming forward, and kind of like victims advocates who have come forward from Australia, who have made some very interesting statements claiming that essentially Virginia was under this. She had been beaten and hospitalized and was under this protective order, and had her children taken from her right at a certain point after she was essentially beaten and hospitalized, which is just a crazy story. But this guy that she met, I'm very interested to learn a little bit more about him, because he has like a background of being I think he was a martial arts trainer, I think, and she met him when she was sent from, I believe it was when Ghislaine and Jeffrey sent her to actually pick up I think it was in Thailand, where she was picking up a prostitute. And basically, that is where she effectively met her husband, who saved her from the network, allegedly, which I don't know. I'm starting to question a lot of this that surrounded, because what I'm realizing is that it seems like in these networks, a lot of the victims age out, and based on the sadistic proclivities of the network and the enterprise at play, man, seemingly they are effectively pursuing all these various aspects of what they can provide, being like in terms of the Dutroux case. There was an example of, I believe it was Anika Lucas. Isn't that her name? I believe the victim who
Anika Lucas. Yeah, correct.
Yeah. So she essentially said that she was about to age out at 11 years old and had been effectively written off to be ritualistically murdered in a snuff film that would then be distributed through the enterprise. And so this is just, again, an aspect of how these networks are facilitated and operate, and they utilize these victims to procure other children. But there are very interesting aspects of, like, I think essentially her the way she described it was that one of the predators within the network seemed to take a liking to her, and so effectively attempted to protect her and set her up with, here are the stages you take to survive and get out of this network alive, basically. And so she was then prostituted and even claimed to have gone to a mind control facility an institution where she was potentially, they utilized mind control techniques on her. So I just found all of that very interesting. As far as her very first interview when she came forward and went public, that was all of her claims, and she seemed very credible. And many of these victims, like, they obviously, as far as victim witnesses, they struggle to readapt, and I mean, many of them don't. Yeah, and it's very tragic to witness, but to see any of these people actually make something out of their lives and then attempt to come forward in some sort of coherent fashion and make a case with some, at least what seem to be credible allegations, right, that are somewhat corroborated, then you have to, take pause and really just reflect on a lot of the details that were, because obviously you guys are already under the impression that the vast majority of these official narratives surrounding most of these scandals, are just,
it's all bullshit, right? It's all bullshit.
Deliberate deception. Yeah.
It's part of the show to the public discourse to discuss these things. We're limited to what, oftentimes we're limited to these subjects with Epstein, like, oh, where's the client list? And I'm asking things like, what was he doing competing against Peter Thiel and funding different AI projects? Like, what's that about? No one's asking that question, right? So I appreciate you're spot on. I couldn't agree with you more on your assessment there. That's why I was excited to have you on here this evening there, Austin, to discuss some of these matters, because I certainly enjoy your opinion, and you're getting some accolades from the chat here. From Zach Salvatore, said, Watergate as good as Stephen Recluse Snyder levels in their pump. So I'm going to have to put Zach's comment, I'll put that to the test here, because Recluse is a good dude of mine. And we've had a lot of conversations on Watergate and all sorts of these matters, over various pots of coffee and various pots of pot.
Right. So, do you think John Dean ordered the second break-in to essentially find out if his wife, Maureen Mo Beinardine, who was personal friends with Heidi Reichen, who ran the Columbia Plaza, a prostitution operation that was set up, the pipeline that was set up to the DNC Watergate complex? Apparently, that there was basically, through this very interesting, Phil Mackin-Bailey was an attorney who was working like local Vice, essentially, in a way where he was just, all his clients were prostitutes in DC,
right?
And he had his essentially he had his law offices raided, and by the feds, and his client list and his address book was revealed.
It sounds like the DC Madam incident. It's very strikingly similar, isn't it?
Exactly. And John Dean, one of the key, he's like a 28-year-old White House advisor for the president, and an attorney who had basically made his name by targeting and prioritizing these dissenting anti-war advocates at the time, right, who were dissenting against and in opposition to the Vietnam War, which is also insane, because there's an interesting story about Carl Schaffler, who was the arresting officer at the Watergate that night, who was just waiting outside at 2 a.m., just happened to be waiting there. Had been tipped off. Yeah, he had dual loyalty to military intelligence. And he had a criminal informant that he was utilizing named Robert Merritt, I believe was his name. And he later on tried to write a book and went public with a lot of these claims, saying that he was actually tasked by the intelligence community, who were utilizing Carl Schaffler, who had dual loyalty to military intelligence, that they were going to prioritize and target Douglas Caddy, who was personal friends with Howard Hunt, right?
Yeah.
One of the burglars.
And who did Howard Hunt work for?
Dude, Mullen and Company.
If I may interject.
Well, the Office of Security as well with Richard Helms, but I think that he was.
But on paper, who did he work for? He was a contract employee on paper.
For sure, was the Mullen and Company. Yeah,
yes,
and Robert Mullen, by the way, very strange. His story tied in with the Mormon Church. Which
I was gonna say we've covered a little bit of this on Occult Rejects Mormon Mafia series. Do you know Heidi Love from the Unfiltered Rise podcast?
Yeah, I do actually.
Yeah, I'm a former Mormon also, so is Heidi, but. Maybe we'll have to convene on some of these matters because Heidi's got a great understanding of these things as well. So Bob Bennett was, the fellow that was his father was the U.S. senator at the time, but he was the one running that Mullen Company and was told, as I'm sure you know, but for the folks of the interwebs, the Watergate Commission told young Mormon Bob Bennett, this is before he was the U.S. senator for decades. You'd think this would disqualify him. They told him, they said they found out that Mullen and Company was a CIA Mormon front company. Yeah, and that exactly. And that they told him to shut it down. They said that was a result, probably one of the few results of the Watergate Commission was shut it down.
Yeah.
Now another one that often gets bandied about as a win in the conspiracy culture community out of that same thing, and kind of relative to some of the topics I'd like to dive into tonight, is the Operation Midnight Climax and how that kind of came about during the Rockefeller hearings. Distant relations, but there was an inspector general of the CIA named John K. Vance. He was the quote unquote whistleblower. Now, we only know about one small little, operation in one row house in the Haight and Ashbury, but that's allegedly the tale. That's what I'm saying. Like, are you really a whistleblower? We don't really understand the depth of what really went on within these kind of experiments like that that started within the Summer of Love out there in '67, which is where the process comes in tonight, where I would like to, kind of start off on some of that, like I said, and get into some of these, how it affects us today with these military intelligence operations and these seemingly Operation Gladio come home type situations. But before we get any further, I wanted to make sure I gave you an opportunity to introduce yourself and your podcast.
Oh, right. My bad.
No, you're good. No, I love all these things. Yeah, it's great. I just want to make sure we get that out of the way. Because folks may, I don't know that you've been a guest on Nick's show before either. So, there may be some folks that are not familiar with your work.
Yeah, I appreciate you, man. So, I'm very bad about doing any real plugs. I tend to forget, but again, it's just who I kind of am. We call the fans Schizo Bros. Basically, it's essentially our collection of like-minded individuals who show up in the chat. But yeah, basically, I'm Austin Picard. I run the Underclass Podcast. Right, I started it. It still very much seems new to me. It's all very seemingly in its infancy as well at this time, I feel like, because I only started this in April of 2023, right? So it's still very new at this moment for me. But at the same time, I feel like I was just kind of overexposed for so long to such an extent with a lot of my consumption of alternative media, and then also just leading me down different rabbit holes where I would effectively, well, really, I was drawn to create the Underclass Podcast because I became entirely disillusioned and disenfranchised by the current structured system, and I'm philosophically opposed to the state in general. That's just kind of how I feel personally, in every facet. I try to opt out as much as possible. I think we've all been very much conditioned to embrace, to fall in line with the permanent establishment at every level. And sure. I think that, I'm very grateful that I have this tendency and inherent instinct to reject authority, which it led me down kind of a path where I endured a few consequences at the beginning of, right when let's say in my youth more, as far as I kind of had to learn through just, some people have to learn the hard way, obviously, right? Yeah, exactly. And for me, I always pushed the boundaries. I tried to see what I could and could not get away with. And also I had a definite. I
like your style there, Austin. I mean, how else do you know your own limitations?
Exactly. Yeah. And put me into, I definitely backed myself into a few different corners that, but again, that's how you learn, I feel, and grow. And so I'm definitely I appreciate the fact that I was able to reflect on my decisions and what the bad decisions I had made and kind of readjust my path and my philosophy on life. And that led me into kind of, trying to restructure and reflect on what my true ideological framework was and the core principles and values that I wanted to uphold. And so then I was
That's
kind of
awesome,
questioning.
man. If I may ask, Austin,
Yeah.
how old are you? 32?
I'm 33. Yeah, I'm 33.
Well, there you go. Well, damn it. I was pretty close. You're you're far wiser than most of your peers.
Thank you, brother. I
Sure.
appreciate that.
I think the way you're just describing how you got into your podcast, I'm not sure, I'm just my assessment of conversations with Nick, how he and I both, sharing how he and I both got into podcasting, more so offline, but having these discussions. But it sounds very similar to what you're describing. That's certainly how I feel about how I kind of got into the podcasting here. Certainly wasn't anything about necessarily really planned to, other than I need to get some of these ideas out of my brain hole. I got too many ideas. I'd like to, you try to share some of these ideas with folks in your life that already, family or friends from other coworkers are like, what is wrong with you? No, I'm not talking about the Nazis. Why do you always want to talk about Nazis and Satanism? Like, no, it's the process, dude. It's not. They're both Nazis and Satanism. Like, oh, here we go. Now we're doing Nazis and Satanists, dude. You're crazy.
Right. Can't handle all that.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's way too much.
Funny. Yeah, and worse than that, you start to question or throw out potential realities of Hitler being a mind-controlled gay prostitute in Vienna in 1907 to 1914, which is just so funny.
It's the mold. Then he goes into military intelligence. It's against the same kind of mold we're describing here in large part. When at least when I reference things like the process, what you're describing kind of fits the mold of what I'm thinking, how I describe those things, and that is more or less the process. Literally the process in which to do hood rat shit, military intelligence style, right? So you build a framework under Satanism or something like that, which is the later iteration, I suppose. But who knows what their framework was back in the Hitler hooker days, right? But nonetheless, it seems to be you build a framework, you do hood rat shit underneath this guise of military intelligence operations. And if anyone asks, like, no, I ain't military intelligence, them are Satanists.
Right.
Them are Nazis.
It seemed like the Tool Society utilizing there you go. This like Ariosophy was a part of the occult ideology that they were apparently utilizing, which a lot of it stemmed back to Helena Blavatsky. Right.
So I'm glad you said that. So in reference to tomorrow's conversation with Ryder Lee, I didn't want to spoil alert on his work, but he kind of looks at the way you were describing that. He kind of, I was on a show last week. We briefly discussed it. He kind of views this Virginia Giuffre situation, or Giuffre, and she never really left that system that you were describing she was born into. And her husband was a handler. So he's done a lot on that theory. He's done a lot of work there. So I don't want to, blow up a spot, but he's done some great stuff. And I'll be on the Occult Rejects tomorrow. But
awesome.
In regards to theosophy, he and I do a lot of. One of my favorite topics on Operation GCD is ancient alien cargo cults, and it turns out all these Satanist organizations are also, as a result of being Thelemites, seem to fall in that category. The process had their watchers, right, as Timothy Wiley described them, these disembodied spirits that were external to Earth type of deal. So. Same difference, same nonsense.
Yeah, I think theosophy, like Blavatsky people, like and Thelemites, or
it all goes back to it, right? Well, you're a former Thelemite, as Ryder and I asserted, it all goes back to Blavatsky, right? All these ideas.
Yeah, just from my opinion, just from looking at Crowley's stuff, as much as
you studied it. I've never studied it. So I respect your opinion, sir.
I do think a lot of that UFO bullshit is done by occultists, especially.
I think it's all done by occultists.
Yeah.
I think John Podesta is a great example of that to exhibit that point here in our modern times.
That's another one, and that's Peter Levenda works with him, and he's in the OTO.
There you go.
There's videos of him actually in rituals, so I'm not even.
He's the one who came up with the term UAP. He's the one who's behind the To the Stars Academy with Tom DeLonge and Peter Levenda. He's been running the DNC since they offed what's his name, Vince Foster, back in '94 or whatever. He seized power in the White House legal counsel office at that point, and he's been running it ever since. So, he's clearly an occultist, and you can even find him on Ancient Aliens. So, these things are what we're describing is, it seems pretty apparent when you look at all the details.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think that, knowing Alan Dulles and the psychological operation aspect of what they attempted to achieve within the framework of the UAP phenomena, the UFO phenomena, but essentially, to me, there was MK Ultra was a huge aspect of introducing this kind of New Age doctrine, esoteric ideology into the framework of where I think that I don't know what your understanding or kind of like belief is on as far as like what seems to be. There seems to be this strange occult framework where they're attempting to usher in the Aeon of Horus or the Age of Aquarius, or they have all these various names for, this rebirth, this occult rebirth that's attempting to happen. That
seems to be the kind of the overarching project. They're all these various seemingly disparate groups are collectively working on together. And I like to joke around, since they're ancient alien cargo cults, they're gonna one day come together like Voltron and hopefully blast off of this planet, because I'm sick and tired of these folks.
Oh yeah, no doubt, man. And honestly,
hold on Kool-Aid and spiked Kool-Aid.
I know that the way that I kind of came across the process was,
there you go. It was my next for you, so I'm glad you read my mind.
It was an interesting kind of slow burn that led me into that direction, which began with really Jonestown, I think. More than anything, because that's what kind of made me question the Warren Commission as far as like this alleged false disclosure that which basically seemed to take place in my mind as far as
limited hangout kind of disclosure, right? Is that
exactly? We're intended to believe that this was a government accountability, and that they effectively ended and obviously ended these programs and clandestine programs afterward. But clearly, in my mind, that never actually transpired, right? And
no, that's a great point. And I was just gonna say, it's kind of like the propaganda narrative from every book published about the process, every documentary made about the process. The process church, disbanded in 1974.
Exactly.
When just as well as I do from looking at the actual details, that's a false narrative. First of all, they still have the same corporate entity today that they started when they incorporated America in 1968, which we can get into that narrative. I think there's a lot to be said about that stuff with that incorporation. But yeah, no, you're spot on with the way these things are sold, even in conspiracy culture. So that was one of the things I was excited to have this conversation about, because 10, 15 years ago, the only person talking about and he hates me, but I'm still going to give him credit. The only person talking about the process was Ed Opperman.
Right. Yeah.
The last time I brought up his name on here, I got a very nasty email. I was like, well, Ed, I gave you nothing, but I commended your work. I don't know why can I talk about you, but so I don't know what's going on there, but nonetheless, I still enjoy his, the fact that he's got he has these old shows up. You can go listen to this.
I found of the process too. That's I heard that. And then I, years later, I got into podcasting, really didn't remember it. And honestly, if it wasn't like for you and Dana, I wouldn't have known jack shit about the Process Church again.
Yeah.
Because before, nobody's really talking about it.
No one's talking about it. Yeah.
And I think there's a lot to be said about it. Nothing like what you guys do.
Yeah. And Ed did some great interviews with like some folks that were there, like Detective Jim Rothstein. Like the folks should definitely go check those out. Again, amazing. I commended him last time, so I hope I don't get a nasty email for commending him this time. But seriously, again, I like it. I don't know. So
I've learned a lot from his show.
The Occult Rejects.
That's what I'm saying, dude. Like, folks should check out Jim Rothstein for sure. This is the dude who is he invented being a vice cop. He's he's kind of at the epicenter of all the activity that leads up to what we know as the Son of Sam era of these cult activities, right? But he was on to it beforehand. So, and Rothstein ain't the only one on there that he does interviews with. So definitely check out the historical record there. I enjoyed you did a process show last year, maybe. I checked it out recently. Yeah. You did a great summary. A lot of the Ed Sanders work I saw in there from the family, which is I'm a big fan of his work. So that's good stuff.
Yeah, that connection to Charles Manson was just like extraordinary stuff. Especially that you have these members of the process that are going and actually meeting with Manson, and then coming out on the other end with an issue for Process Magazine, right, called The Death Issue, and then what they met with what's his name that wrote that ridiculous book, and then and then Tom O'Neill had a run-in with him. Shit, what was the name? It's escaping me right now, but anyway, still he was,
I think you're bringing up some good points with Tom O'Neill and this kind of narrative of how these things are still not being described properly. So to that point, if folks want to check out historical stuff, I highly recommend Ed Opperman's work on his Opperman report. But like I said, if you want to, updated stuff, I think you did a great job. I know folks are familiar with Dana Dudall, Rodney Jules. She does, her and her team do some spectacular work on documenting a lot of these things. So she's done a great job of finding a lot of they're piecing together a lot of these things, but to the point of things aren't being discussed right. You have Tom O'Neill. He publishes a book that takes him 20 years on Charles Manson. He does not include the process. Are you kidding me, Austin?
Yeah, that's ridiculous, man.
Absolutely. 20 years. He couldn't find the process in there. Huh?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that honestly, we know what a limited hangout looks like, and in my mind, it just seems, I do believe she's effectively the gold standard on the process right now in the alternative media landscape, because she's really, at the very least, she's prioritizing it and effectively spotlighting it in the best way, and I appreciate that much. But I just consistently seem to rediscover the process when I'm really just going, researching what I thought to be unrelated cases. And then all of a sudden there's this very credible thread of evidence proving that there's a local chapter of the process that is affiliated with the case in a very real, tangible level. And it's undeniable.
So is this the Jeffrey McDonald case you're referring to? It sounds like.
Absolutely. Dr. Jeffrey McDonald was the first one that, beyond David Berkowitz, obviously, was Dr. Jeffrey McDonald. The Fort Bragg murders just was an extraordinary case that I stumbled upon. And by the way, Ed Opperman, he interviewed Jeffrey McDonald's current wife, right? Who was basically,
I think that's great. And I'm actually going to send clips of this to Ed Opperman just so he knows that I'm commending him still. I hope I don't get a nasty message in return, but I don't want someone else to send him me commending him. I want at least me to send it to him. But no, he does. That's what I'm saying. Even today, he's doing interviews with current cases where Jeffrey McDonald's rotting away in prison still today over these matters. But before we dive in further there, if I may interject, Tara Jackson here would like your description of what is the process there, Austin. I would also like
process. Yeah. So obviously you have to consider the fact that who founded the process was Robert de Grimston and Marianne McLean, who are very much affiliated with Scientology. And so I think just knowing the fact that they were personal friends with, obviously with L. Ron Hubbard, who I believe is definitely affiliated with intelligence, if not a direct intelligence operative. And I think
I like to say he kind of comes out of that ONI network when we're talking about these warring factions of intelligence agencies. He's got that kind of ONI background, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Office of Naval Intelligence. It's typical within the context of a lot of these cases. And by the way, that just came up recently in terms of Waco, which blew my mind.
Oh,
I couldn't even believe.
I didn't know that. I hate to detour you off your description. I do apologize, but I think that is it's an important factor when we're considering these feuding. I call them lack of intelligence agencies, but I think that it plays into because they do operate into these cult spheres like you're describing. That's the origin of what's going on here. But please, I apologize. Please continue.
Oh no, you're good. I just I do think that the philosophy of the process is very interesting because again, it's like you consider the fact that you have like these three three separate gods that are represented, and also you have these subgroups like the Jehovah's, you have the Luciferians, and you have it's very interesting the difference within the context of what they represented, right? Because the Jehovah's were more of the Puritans of the sect, according to Maury Terry, which
they're strict in their ordinances to like life and everything. They're not like the freaky Satanists, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And the Luciferians, in contrast, were basically a lot more involved with sex magic and sex rituals, and so they advocated sensuality and tranquility and like drug and induced orgies is essentially what they were embracing, a free use of narcotics. And so then you have the Satanists, who clearly, they were attempting devil worship in every way, ritualistic sacrifice, animal sacrifice, and so I think that alone, when you view it, the kind of the philosophy of the processins and how they could move up and down this ladder and embrace which subset of the ideology that they really just they had kind of this internal proclivity to it was more appealing to them. But also consider that this is more of like a doomsday cult, as far as the way that they would imbue this philosophy into the acolytes, because they were talking about
the acolytes being their actual term, right, for some of their members.
Yeah, absolutely. And the gray forces of moderation was a very interesting aspect of something that they would discuss. But it was strange to me because obviously you have these different branches that would effectively converge for the final judgment, which would mark the end of the world. And so that was the doomsday.
They're going to come together like Voltron, right?
Yeah, which again, it's like with the Order of the Solar Temple is very interesting to me because they had this philosophy of a final transit to the star Sirius, and they had these. It's
always serious, man. It's always serious every freaking time.
Why so serious?
Right. But it's fascinating stuff because they would have these ascended elders that would come down in the OTS, and apparently they actually had like a Hollywood special effects producer who was one of the right-hand men of Joseph DeMambro, and was behind the scenes, behind a curtain, like producing these special effects. So the members who had just taken some form of LSD or some style of they'd be tripping, and then actually witness like a hologram. It was like Tupac's hologram, but in the 80s. It was basically
it was definitely magic, like even the magician pulling the rabbit out of the hat stuff going on.
Exactly. Yeah. And even Princess Grace Kelly was effectively tied in with the OTS, and I didn't realize that she had been like initiated through a sex ritual where they like use these what's it called, where where they put the needles and the points in
acupuncture.
Acupuncture. So basically, they specifically use these acupuncture needles to place in these meridian points on the body, and she was induced into having like a relentless orgasm, right? And it was very interesting. But this was the initiatory process. And basically, what had happened was Joseph DeMambro had attempted to kind of very much he was kind of trying to swindle money from most of the members of the OTS at the time, but he was a little sloppy in his presentation in terms of Grace Kelly, and kept trying to kind of leech more and more of her financial funds that he was attempting to get her to he was kind of, again, he crossed some boundaries. And by the way, I think that the fact that you have the Prince of Monaco, right, who's definitely tied into.
I was about to say, for folks who don't know who Grace Kelly is, she's an American actress who married the Prince of Monaco, that little weird country in the
he's
south
tied
of France,
directly
right?
into essentially the Rosicrucian order in Monaco, and had effectively apparently helped incorporate the OTS at that time in Monaco. And so it makes a lot of sense that he would be that Princess Grace would be affiliated, and apparently she was.
There's a lot of royals in these cults, right? It's not. I just want to, if I may, this is not a one-off situation. There's a lot. NXIVM, the process. Everyone likes to have their little royal situation in these things. And again, I would actually argue NXIVM is the Albany chapter of the process, would have evolved into, but we can get into that a little bit later.
Right.
So no, I appreciate we're going with the solar temple stuff too. So What I'm hearing, what you're saying is like, this is kind of an offshoot, even though they're not openly calling themselves the process. This is kind of an offshoot, and that's kind of how I view the process as well as this. So they have these three gods, and they really incorporate four later when they incorporate Jesus under the foundation faith movements, etc. Right?
Exactly.
So they do that because they can then incorporate anyone else's religion, kind of like they can fold up any other cult, kind of, right? So I view it as the process was the process for like maybe MI6 and possibly ONI or CIA or both.
Absolutely.
The process in which they're going to do these hood rat shit operations right underneath this cult business, where they can then incorporate any other cult within the Lucifer, Jehovah, Satan, Christ's circumstances, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and I find it interesting.
And that's kind of what I was taking there,
right? And I think that when they kind of abscond to Mexico after they leave the UK, it's very interesting to me because you have the Metamoros cult and the Hand of Death cult. It seems like there was. So I was reading about how potentially there were auctions being held in Metamoros for abducted children, and that essentially when the finders were caught in Tallahassee in '87, that they were on their way to auction these children in Metamoros in Mexico, and that this was all tied back to a Jesuit institution. And so it made a lot of sense to me because you had so many Georgetown affiliates who were tied into the finders cult, and
right.
In my opinion, the Finders cult, I believe Ted Gunderson. I think that the Finders cult was definitely a CIA cutout to abduct and auction children, and more than that. I mean, they were effectively it's very interesting because they have this crazy connection to this sort of like they were training CIA operatives on computer systems at the time, which is very crazy to me that this was even a part of the entire narrative in regard to the Finders cult. But, consider the fact, by the way, that I discovered most of this through Jonestown. And like I had said, right, Congressman Leo Ryan's aide, William Holsinger, who basically claims that that William Holsinger, right, basically, you have a UC Berkeley professor who wrote up this crazy document called the Penal Colony, this paper that detailed how the CIA's mind control programs were effectively driven underground and allegedly stopped in '73, but they had not. They were driven underground for plausible deniability, and that was all effectively exposed through this Penal Colony paper. And so that was in 1980, I believe, when Holsinger even claimed that Richard Dwyer was at Jonestown, who was a CIA operative who tied in directly to handling, Jim Jones, and so
for sure.
Yeah,
no, that's a great point. If I may piggyback on that real quick, I want to put a note back there in before we got let's just start with Jonestown there, because you made some great points there. So Jonestown, I think, is interesting in the way in the regard you're saying. I didn't know that's how you found the process. That's also interesting, but. It's definitely in the same conversation, right? Because he's a Christian component, right? So maybe he's part of that Christian kind of faction of this whole network. So he's deeply integrated into politics there in San Francisco, and in fact, in large part as a result of the fallout of Jonestown, we can thank the political career of the fallout of Jonestown for Dianne Feinstein. So Jonestown is part of the disaster of Jonestown is actually Dianne Feinstein. So you're familiar with the infamous Twinkie assassination, right? There in San Francisco City Hall.
Absolutely. It's so ridiculous, honestly. But, by the way, we have a Kamala connection as well, right? Essentially because of...
Absolutely, with Willie Brown.
Exactly.
So for folks not familiar with it, one of the cleanup crews in the Jonestown situation was a fellow by the name of Dan White, a former SF San Francisco PD officer turned, councilman, and he walked into the office of the mayor with Harvey Milk. Folks remember the Sean Penn film Milk, I'm sure. They that guy's an idol in the Q community. I call it Q, like LGBTQ, all of the above Q.
That's
Q
great.
Community. So he walks in there and murders them, and then he does like 2 years in a mental institution because he said that he ate a Twinkie, and that a sugar rush had caused him to lose his mind. And they're like, yeah, that makes sense, dude. That seems reasonable. Yeah.
Right. So, man, I'm telling you.
And and as a result of that, Dianne Feinstein became, instead of lieutenant mayor or deputy mayor, she then became the mayor as a result of this assassination. And this is at the same time she hired that Chinese spy as her driver, it turns out, back there around 1980 again. And also, she was so Looney Tunes that even the folks of San Francisco would not elect her. Speaking of Kamala, right? She shares that same attribute. Even the folks out there would not elect her. She's so damn Looney Tunes. Dianne Feinstein ran for mayor numerous times. She was appointed deputy mayor and then again seized power and then ran for Senate and never looked back. But it was all very interesting amongst this whole network of how these major parapolitical assassinations are connected. But
and by the way,
the other pen was the Metamoro stuff. But yeah, please go ahead.
Oh, I just there was another assassination of a diplomat in DC. It was through a car bomb. I'm trying to remember his name. It was tied back
that spot actually, DuPont Circle.
Yeah.
So connections with Colonia Dignidad and this Nazi safe haven through these clandestine rat lines that had been set up post World War II, and basically Colonia Dignidad was where they essentially were carrying out war crimes in Chile. Yeah, don't drink the Kool-Aid, man. But it was Flavor Aid. People get really upset that if you call it Kool-Aid in the nerdy Jonestown community because it was technically Flavor Aid. It was the off-brand. These are Marxists, right?
Right.
We got to remember these communists
can't support the corporations.
I just thought it was so funny because you listen to the death tape, right? And he's pleading. And by the way, obviously, like the racial dynamic in Jonestown is very strange, right? You have this interesting inner circle of Jim Jones that are all white guys, and then you have that members of the Red Brigade essentially as well, and then you have the vast majority of the members of the People's Temple just being African American, and a lot of It is strange though because listening to the death tape, he's like. There's this one woman who's basically just kind of pushing back on like, why do we have to kill ourselves? Like, didn't you say we had an out to like go to Russia and be saved?
Sounds like Heaven's Gate cult right there. Why do we have to drink the Kool-Aid? I thought we were going to catch Haley's Comet.
Exactly. And he pleads to them by saying, don't you all want to die? Good,
right?
God believing.
Don't you want to be in right with the Lord, right?
Yeah. And it's very interesting, but you have all the rest of them already in kind of a frenzy, shouting her down. Shut up, bitch. Like it's good. It's crazy how they actually are speaking to her. And yet you still kind of like listening to the whole tape. You hear him say, "Get Dwyer out of here," right? Jim Jones, because obviously Richard Dwyer was the CIA asset who was fundamentally, had already gone down to the Port Cayuma airstrip where Congressman Leo Ryan had been assassinated, and then had made it back to the temple in time for the mass exodus, right? The mass suicide allegedly. But yeah,
wasn't the State Department fellow that wasn't later turned out he was a CIA operative as well, the one that was on the airstrip and survived.
Exactly, and by the way, I think the entire
didn't get him either.
Right, and when you look into the family that was involved, because it's very interesting in terms of Jonestown specifically, because if you get into the details of Larry Layton and his father, who technically was in charge he was basically in charge of psychological operations and MK Ultra at a certain level, basically, because he was running this advanced medical. So basically,
where was this out of?
This is let me pull up Larry Layton because it's in my notes. It's very interesting because
when you're saying stuff like that again, and back to this NXIVM situation. Again, I'll go into it later when we go back to the process situation. We'll get there eventually, but to that chronologically speaking. But just while we're on the subject, so NXIVM, it was often undescribed. Again, these things that go undescribed, even though these topics are, everyone knows the word NXIVM, but most folks don't know NXIVM was literally doing MK Ultra experiments on their membership out of a hospital in Albany and a facility in Monterrey, Mexico. The neurologist who was a member of the cult, folks can go look up his his commission hearing there with the licensing commission in the state of New York, he lost his doctor's license over these matters. And they don't say it was MK Ultra experiments, but they cite that he was doing forcing strapping folks to a chair, strapping their eyes open, and forcing them to watch snuff films, because we've already touched on that. Wow. That's a big part of this stuff. So one of the investigatory documents I read said they had identified 7 or 8 women that seemed to be actual murder victims in these snuff films. Apparently, there's one reference to that, an offhanded reference in the report.
My God!
And they don't say it was New York or Mexico, because I wonder, because again, when we're talking Matamoros, again, that's in the state of Monterey. It's not far from the city of Monterey, so it makes you wonder how long has this stuff been going on, because Nick and I did a couple episodes on these subjects with Matamoros and the vampire cult, right, Nick? Which is all out of that same region. They're all doing narco drug trafficking. They're all doing it under this guise of kind of Satanism stuff, right?
Yeah. And it all gets really fucking weird and out of control.
And it seems like the victims, as always, are not targeted, right? I mean, I'm sorry, not random. You have a DEA agent's son, right, in the Matamoros victim list. He's the one who spawned the investigation, really. And it turns out that old Adolfo Costanzo was reporting directly to the head of Interpol in Mexico, and he was apparently he was helping Costanzo infiltrate into these different drug cartels, right? Which he'd already done 2 before Matamoros. He infiltrates the cartel, takes out the leader, and then moves on to the next one by becoming their spiritual leader, right? So he had a whole MO with that, and I'm sure probably he was a prostitute, male prostitute. So there's probably weird sex stuff too, but
absolutely,
you know what I mean. So there's a whole narrative there that operates around these cults that, as many times as Matamoros gets described, I'm gonna have to obviously provide myself and Nick and Julia over at Cosmic Peach and Heidi and Jen, who have all participated in these conversations as well. And I think Rye from Codex's Codega of Conspiracies there, who sent us down this track, right, Nick? But we were starting to compare all these things, and there's so much comparison to, all the stuff we're talking about here with the process cults, with all that stuff there in Mexico. And again, Nexium was operating out of there, and Adolfo Costanza may as well be named Charles Manson, in my opinion. They both serve the same purpose.
Seriously, man. And it was Larry Layton's dad. I found this very interesting, because he was basically he was the biochemist in charge of the U.S. Army's chemical warfare program at its Dugway Proving Ground in Utah.
Yeah. So he's kind of doing a Frank Zappa's dad situation, but he's not at Edgewood Arsenal. He's in Dugway Proving Ground.
And it's very interesting, because all the large amounts of psychoactive mind control drugs found on the site at Jonestown, sodium pentothal, diazepam, thorazine, Larry Layton,
Jones
lieutenant. Exactly. And Larry Layton, the lieutenant who became the only person charged in any of the killings, also a key member of the airstrip hit team, obviously, and somehow survived the Jonestown massacre. He's later described as sinking into a post-hypnotic trance as he sunk ever deeper under Jones' spell. Layton's own father, who was running this biochemist as far as running the U.S. Army chemical warfare program, he even said that he called him a robot. Larry Layton, his own son, the only one ever charged. And so that, to me, I found very interesting, because it was George Philip Blakey, who was Larry Layton's brother-in-law. Now, this man is the man who arranged the lease on Jonestown with the Guyanese government on Jim Jones' behalf, and was reportedly a mercenary for the CIA-backed United Rebels in Angola, which we know for a fact now that Operation Shalom, I think, is what it was called, with Colston Westbrook. That's his name. And basically
he was part of go ahead. No, you go ahead.
No, you're good, buddy. I know.
No, you're explaining. I was going to say, can you please describe who that is? Yeah, please go ahead.
Right. Yeah. So he essentially was a part of Project Phoenix, or the Phoenix operation, right? And basically was tasked with training Angolan rebels on this black site, which then became Jonestown, the People's Temple of Jonestown in the remote jungles of Guyana, right on the right on the border of Venezuela, I believe is what it borders, which is very interesting as far as the geopolitical context of that playing out at the time, especially considering the British Black Watch who were in the area when the mass suicide took place, who just so happened to be in the area. And then you have Colonel Bo Gritz, who was the negotiator who went down to Ruby Ridge and was trying to talk to Randy Weaver, and because Randy Weaver was a former Green Beret. So
right.
I'm
glad you brought that up because I do want to get into Idaho, and that's obviously a very seminal event in recent history in Idaho regarding all these matters.
Definitely. And I won't forget to explain Colston Westbrook a little bit, but it's still interesting as far as the fact that you have Colonel Bo Gritz claiming as a former Special Forces Green Beret commander that he was told by Green Beret Special Forces operatives that were called to the site of the People's Temple Agricultural Project in Jonestown, and that he was told that this was a cleanup crew for MK Ultra, and that this was an MK Ultra operation gone wrong. They were effectively, all right, we have to essentially, the ops been overexposed. Let's lure down Congressman Leo Ryan because he had been a thorn in the side of the intelligence apparatus and definitely the agency at the time. He had been just showing up at Langley saying, all right, show me the files. What have you guys been up to? and he's like,
right. That's going to piss a lot of folks off.
Man, and one of the most radical congressmen I've ever read about. I can't even imagine a congressman doing something like this in modern day. He was going in covertly into the prison complex in California, and he was attempting to go in as a prisoner to effectively understand how they were treating prisoners at the time. And so he's going undercover and like into these maximum facilities, which were just like, it's very interesting to me. But again, he claimed that Patty Hearst was obviously a product of MK Ultra, and that the SLA, the Symbionese Liberation Army, was effectively a construct of the intelligence apparatus through MK Ultra's clandestine operation, utilizing the institution Vacaville, where basically Charles Manson had attended in the early 50s, which ties directly into his mind control training and conditioning. And knowing what they did at Vacaville, it's very interesting because they had this policy of, first of all, understanding the California prison complex is so compromised, and it was really just being utilized by the intelligence apparatus at the time to perform these covert operations. And so what they utilized this institution for, they were just like letting prisoners go after they received their conditioning, and they would show up in random locations all around the domestic U.S. causing chaos. It seemed like
causing chaos. There you go.
Tension, right? So
that's the order of the day, and that's kind of where, if I may, that's where we can circle back to the process. Your explanation is great. I love how you're connecting all of these things, because I do view them as all connected through these military spook operation networks as you're describing. We're sold different story narratives publicly. This is you may as well just call it the swamp gas theory, if you will. But we're sold publicly Disneyland narratives around these subjects that may have some truth that rooted in them, but they're spinning away from the idea of that narrative is to spin away from whatever's really going on, right? So, and that is obviously what's going on with Jonestown. We even talk about what they drank improperly, right? So, and again, all those we find out later, all those spooks around there, and we find that what I'm getting at here is we find that with every kind of process thing. So with the RFK assassination, so when they came to America basically in '68 there, and immediately got to business with some stuff, and with the RFK situation, we find out there's just process and CIA folks everywhere around them, but we don't find that out till years later, right? So between Thane Eugene Caesar and a fellow by the name of Allard Lowenstein, who just happened to be best friends with Donald Rumsfeld, totally normal. He comes out, he's a congressman at the time. He comes out later, and we find out after he gets murdered in his office in 1980 by a mind control assassin. Some dude just walks in there, mind control style, and just murders him, like Dan White did. You don't know Allard Lowenstein?
I don't know of this story, man.
No, dude. I was when you were describing stuff, I was downloading a lot of pictures to show you. So from my phone here. So Allard Lowenstein was a congressman. He was a congressman with him and Rummy, as he called him. They were a junior congressman together, and then he was a Democrat. Rummy was a Republican. This is the sixth.
Losing you, JJ. Gremlin's got you.
Right.
Yeah,
This is just it's a perfect window into how they coexist, right? To manufacture that kind of illusion, the two-party delusion, right? There you're back.
On my back, all right. I was about to say, I got cut out. I was filling my Wi-Fi situation there. So, yeah, let me bring up Lowenstein. So, like I said, he's tight with Rumsfeld and whatnot, but we find out after he's murdered in 1980 that he was a CIA agent the entire time he was a congressman. And again, no one bats an eye at these things, and I'll make a point here in a moment how that's still relevant today. But so Lowenstein's literally at. I don't know that he's at the dinner in Malibu the night before the Ambassador Hotel murking of RFK, but I know from his staffer, from some folks that worked for him. I spent 6 years in DC, and I don't do politics, and I've only voted once under duress, and that's a long story. It was. I was on active duty, and he's facing jail. And you got to vote. It sounds ridiculous, and it really is ridiculous, but it's a different story altogether. Nonetheless, I don't play politics, but nonetheless, I knew a lot of political folks, and I heard some stories. So Lowenstein was allegedly at the Ambassador Hotel with. This came from a staffer who worked for him at the time. It was an old person, by the time I'd met this person. I managed the budget for military police for the Air Force, so I would have interactions with folks in Congress are always trying to get their earmarks and pork stuff and whatever other weird political name they want to add to these things in the budget. So, you need like somebody within the military to be like, yeah, we need that shit. And I would just tell people we don't need that shit. In fact, I never come back to my office again. And that found me quickly in the crosshairs of the Podesta brothers because they ran K Street. They were the kings of K Street and the lobbyists. They ran all the lobbyists there. And if you found out quick, if you tell lobbyists to go fuck themselves, that you're going to find yourself in a weird circumstances and environment in that town. But nonetheless, my point being is Lowenstein, by a credible source, Lowenstein was at the Ambassador Hotel in the kitchen and was one of the individuals holding RFK's dead body.
My God, man.
So that's our Lowenstein. Now his son was deep up in the Clinton State Department and is very prominently noted within the Podesta emails.
Oh my God!
So,
wow, asking for Thalemic favor.
That is insane. I know.
Well, the Thalemic favor was the Yale University's librarian asking John Podesta for a one-on-one meeting with Barack Obama. That was the Thalemic favor.
Wow.
Yale librarian.
What?
Yeah, right. Weird, right?
That is so
fucking
crazy,
dude. Much like dentists, dude. I think librarians are just fucking they're like assassins waiting in the wings, right? Austin. You've probably seen a lot of this weird dentist activity around a lot of these cult networks, right? Specifically around Manson and hypnotists, dentists. There's a lot of creepy little weird professions. You may not think like that's a dangerous person, but
Tim McVeigh as well. He I found something very interesting on McVeigh recently, but I'll pull that here in a moment because it was very interesting to see that one of the MK Ultra facilities that was being utilized for the modern operation was basically he was working security there after he came back from the alleged Gulf War and then had his run-in with the special forces and dropped out of the training allegedly, even though he told his sister that obviously he and a select few their social security numbers were called out when they were in formation one day after they took these various tests and psychological tests, and he had scored very high on this test. And so basically he had been recruited into covert clandestine domestic operations, and this was the moment that this occurred. But it's very strange because it seems like he had told individuals who, in I think it was David Paul Hammer or Paul David Hammer. I always mix that name up, but one of the inmates on death row who he served time with, he told him that he essentially, no, he would not die. He had in the large molar, I think is where it was in his tooth. He had basically been microchipped, he claimed, essentially through this process, and that he would effectively be rescued by his, basically they would give him a counteracting dose that would basically counteract his end of life moment when he was executed, and then he would be ushered off. Which obviously, if you know the details of kind of how they misdirected the public to the hearse and everything that happened with his body.
Please get into some of that. It's very mysterious. Folks like to think it's cut and dry, and it's not, is it?
It's fascinating stuff. But the whole reason I even brought it up was because I found out about there's this insane series of photos that were in basically in Time magazine in this. It's very strange because it seems like this has a direct tie-in to Sirhan basically being, so Henry Luce ran Time whenever these pictures were taken, where they were in Grand Central Park, right? And they were basically they were basically it was for this skate issue where all these, like, it was strange, they were all brown people, and like Sirhan was one of them, seemingly, with the individual busboy who was basically the first to be on RFK's body in the pantry of the ambassador that night. And so he was also in that same picture years before, just a few years prior to I believe it was in 63 or 64 when the pictures took place. But it's fascinating stuff. And
Sirhan's got a lot of interesting connections, doesn't he? Besides Rosicrucianism and whatnot and everything else, and that 1974 INS report placing him. So I want to just ask your opinion on this. Placing him at the scene of the Tate Polanski home doing sex magic rituals with an English, quote unquote, English satanic cult. That's the process. So that would be circa late May or early, presumably late May of 1968, according to that report. But the process. That's what I'm saying. This journey into America, back to the process. They don't. It's always mired in mystery and typically false facts. So one of the things I know Dana Doodall turned up was them calling themselves the process far earlier. I believe it was in a corporate document dating back to 66, I believe, in the UK. Now the corporation's name wasn't the process, but the opening sentence of the corporate document say this is for a group that calls itself the process.
Interesting. Yeah, that's amazing, especially considering how if you think about John Markham, I found this very interesting. He has direct connections to Satanic Murder Inc., right? Which is very strange. The LaRouche trials and all that's connected in with that. It's very interesting because it seems like, clearly, first of all, he's incorporating the San Francisco chapter of the process, and he's directly involved with Jeffrey McDonald's defense, which is very interesting, right?
Well, if I may, Austin. Yeah. So John Markham, he did incorporate them in New York, but before that, he incorporated them. I'm sorry, San Francisco. But years prior to that, he incorporated them in New York. I believe it was 72 when they moved to Pound Ridge. So he's working for them for over 12 years. Then, like you're saying, he leaves office, goes to the U.S. Attorney's office, is hired by Tuesday Weld's cousin. That's a different story altogether, Bill Weld. And then he starts prosecuting. I know LaRouche is clearly involved in Iran-Contra. I'd love to get your opinion here, but to me, he's clearly involved in Iran-Contra, but he seems to be the only one actually blowing any whistles.
Yeah.
They charge him with fraud, right? And they send the process attorney after him, and he's publishing in. This is a weird dynamic that folks I think really need to understand. At this very same time, LaRouche is publishing in his publications how John Markham is an attorney for the same satanic military intelligence spook operation that he's trying to out.
Exactly.
It's fascinating. He's like, is anyone not paying attention to this? So, obviously he's friends with Oliver North. I mean, there's a lot of probably negative shit you can say about LaRouche, but he wasn't wrong. This Anglo-American influence is perpetrated through the process, but it's also perpetrated through other mechanisms like the secret society that created America, the Society of the Cincinnati, which is also represented in the process. And Dana Doodall and I, Rotting Jewels, there, we did. Folks can check it out on an earlier episode of Operation GCD. She was a guest on. We did the Society of the Cincinnati meets the process. So did some genealogy on some of these folks. So, these things are, they're rooted in the folks that run this place. It's not just, some low level shit. This is some of the upper echelon shit we're talking about here. So when we're talking about how these narratives are skewed and, these timelines are kind of funky and they don't really seem to make sense given the known facts, I think we can kind of understand that
Right.
that is when we understand where it's kind of coming from, right? So,
Man, and I had no real understanding as far as we know obviously the RFK assassination is perfectly implicated in terms of the process involvement, but I had no realization of the JFK assassination. Basically, was it blew my mind honestly
Tommy Jude Baumler.
Yeah, dude, and
so well. If we may close out on Bill Weld here and at least put a pin on there, Bill Weld, Society of Cincinnati Family. I'm not saying he's a member, but the Welds basically run the Massachusetts chapter. They started Harvard, etc. Right? Their home was built on a mound, Weld Manor. That was the chapter. That was kind of the Wars of 1776. That was the headquarters, kind of in Massachusetts, was the Weld home. So very powerful family. And again, he hires Markham, the attorney, to prosecute this guy LaRouche, but Markham, we'll come back to him in a second because he's got a lot of other interesting things going on there with him. But,
yeah.
Yeah. We can finish up with Markham, I suppose. If you don't, yeah, that's good. What are your thoughts on his involvement? So you mentioned Gunderson, right? So Ted Gunderson, famed FBI agent. He retires in, I think, 79 after they wouldn't appoint him the new FBI director because before he ran COINTELPRO, he was the subversive actions of all these kind of nefarious hood rat shit we're talking about. COINTELPRO is the FBI's kind of version. He's doing the I think he was the assistant to J. Edgar Hoover. Then he ran COINTELPRO, and then he, by his own admission, he thought he was going to be the next director at some point. But then he leaves and gets involved in fighting satanic panic. Oh, and it's that point in time where he's like, I'm gonna go help this Jeffrey McDonald guy at Fort Bragg. And then it seems like he brings in Alan Dershowitz and John Markham as attorneys, right? To help Jeffrey McDonald, who is screaming since day one that a hippie satanic cult murdered his family in the middle of the night, Manson style, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and it's crazy to me because you just consider the fact that, obviously these are the usual suspects involved with the vast majority of what seems to be. I think this really implicates this wider clandestine intelligence international network that was essentially kind of implemented post World War II.
Permindex?
Very
like Permindex, like we were talking JFK there.
Wackenhut's the same thing in my mind.
Permindex, you see a guy that is allegedly a member of the process on its board. So, obviously they're not the process yet at this point in time with Permindex, but in the early 60s when Jim Garrison's investigating specifically and charges board member Clay Shaw, right, in the famed Garrison investigation and JFK assassination. Clay Shaw's associate, besides mafia boss Joseph Bonanno, was on that board, was Roy Cohn, who David Berkowitz would identify as a member of the process.
Hold on. Say that one more time, because David Berkowitz, you already know, was claiming that Roy Cohn was running human compromise operations in his home in Massachusetts with these various parties that he was having, and that the process was providing young children for those very parties of sexual blackmail.
And David Berkowitz did sign a memorandum in '96, witnessed by multiple parties, including Maury Terry, saying that he witnessed Roy Cohn been to Roy Cohn's house, and apparently Roy Cohn was the in at Studio 54. Folks often wonder, well, how did David Berkowitz get into Studio 54, as he claims? Well, it seems that was Roy Cohn's official office, so he had kind of taken over more or less ownership of that. The owners of Studio 54 were in debt to Roy and his law partner to the tune of a lot of money, and that law partner left the mayor's office, Mayor A. Beam's office, to go, do Roy hood rat stuff. So do you see this connection? Not only,
Abraham Beam, is that what you're saying?
Berkowitz said A. Beam's son and multiple staffers were part of there, and I would assert, I would assert one of those staffers was Roy Cohn's law partner, who was also represented the Studio 54 owners and numerous hood rat shit. So there's a lot to be said there with those weird dynamics, right? For sure.
Definitely.
But Roy Cohn, interesting character. But yeah, he's on the board of Permindex, and if we're going to talk JFK, then I'll make the point that Jim Garrison, I think, was the man who brought those charges against the Permindex board member Clay Shaw, and was investigating folks like Tommy Jude Baumler's crew there, the attorney that incorporates the process, who worked out of Guy Bannister's office. Jim Garrison knew all of these characters long before then. Bannister, all Baumler, all these guys. He knew they were a shady bunch. He knew David Ferry back from for 20 plus years when David Ferry was Lee Harvey Oswald's Civil Air Patrol leader, right?
Yeah.
Jim Garrison was the general in charge of those numerous Civil Air Patrol units. So he was the FBI agent in Idaho. He was the FBI agent in, I think, Idaho and Montana when Guy Bannister and Fred Chrisman are running UFO operations in July of 47 out of Puget Sound, right? So Garrison knew what the fuck was going on with these people. And then he charges Clay Shaw in 67 there, right? And then the process show up in New Orleans. I don't think that's by any stretch coincidental. And then they hire an attorney he's already been investigating for numerous years, right? Out of an office that he's already been investigating for numerous years. These things are not lost on him, right? If you look at no one really talks about this, but if you look at the grand jury statements, he was looking at mainly around a fellow by the name of just drew a blank. Oh, not Lee Harvey Oswald. That's ridiculous. Lee Harvey Oswald's double.
Kerry Thornley. Yes, dude. I was about to bring him up because that is the direct connection to the process with the JFK assassination in my mind. And
no, it absolutely is. I think Discordianism, his little religion, I don't buy their bullshit narrative of how it started. I view it as a offshoot of the process within this whole military spook apparatus. And I think Garrison did too. So Garrison would follow Thornley throughout his life. He would follow Thornley to Atlanta, Atlanta, circa 1979. Why is Jim Garrison visiting Atlanta in 79 other than to go harass Gary Thornley at the time of the Atlanta child killings?
That's exactly. Oh my God, man, you're blowing my mind because of course that is exactly where I'm at personally in this moment. I'm investigating the Atlanta child murders. That's going to be my next upcoming episode because I just couldn't even believe that. Of course, allegedly the process, the way it was explained, but I think it's far more complicated than this. But I did see it in many different ways explained as if they uprooted from upstate New York, and then all of a sudden they resurface in Atlanta just around the time that the Atlanta child murders are taking place. And you have this very strange.
Right. It's a little bit more complex than that. You are correct, sir, but that is an accurate description. That's an apt description.
Right. And I think that as far as the honestly, I think that the way that Detective Jim Rothstein was kind of viewing that all at the time as well was kind of, he was trying to figure it out as he went. And so the way that he viewed it was that there was a specific cell that he was investigating that I think maybe had potentially fled the area after he was investigating the Untermeyer Park connections to the Devil's Cave and all these mass death or these mass graves of Alsatian German Shepherd dogs and things of that nature. And by the way, another strange facet of
just one note, if I may there, Austin. So I know folks often get tripped up on the interchangeable usage of Alsatian and German Shepherds. It's the same breed. They just during the World War II, the British were like, we can't call these things Germans anymore, so we'll call them Alsatians.
That's so funny. But yeah, that and there's a direct. Yeah, exactly. And there's there's a tie-in directly to kind of the Nazi occultism aspect of a lot of the philosophy playing out as far as the loyalty tests with the Alsatian dogs, which I found very interesting because of course they would have members of the SS. They would gift them puppies, these German Shepherd puppies, and then they would raise them and have to execute them at a certain point. And this was a loyalty test to some extent. And of course, another aspect of kind of, I think it was far more than that, because I think that animal sacrifices and blood rituals are actually a far more of a part of kind of the approach of the occultist mindset and philosophical, in my mind, they were exercising this occultism within the inner circle of the SS. And that was very obvious. I mean, you have,
if you don't mind, will you unpack that thought a little bit? Because Nick and I keep looking at all these various animal sacrifices, specifically dog stuff. And we frequently communicate offline conversations, like trying to, bounce ideas, like what is really the root of all this animal sacrifice stuff, right? Why are they so focused on German Shepherds?
Yeah, it is very strange. And And by the way, remember that story of Rudolf Hess, like apparently putting on the robe that had all these ancient runes all over it, and he's having these like magical wars with Aleister Crowley at the time, allegedly, and that he like decides that he's going to board a Cessna essentially and fly into the UK, and he gets shot down over the UK airspace, and
Sure.
and was put instantly into prison. But it was a very strange
he was going to
story.
meet with the British Royals there, right? Because there was the British Royals who were supporters, right? That was the story, right?
Yeah, that's
want to meet
story.
King Charles' uncle, right?
Exactly. And but again, it's like with the strange stories and in terms of these Alsatian dogs, it does seem like it was one, it was far easier to, of course, get access to these animals that wouldn't have any sort of real tie to anyone looking out for their well-being or concerned about the ultimate consequence of what might happen to the dogs once they were actually taken in by the organization and utilized for the blood ritual sacrifice. So I think that's one aspect of it. It's easier to get a hold of animals. But specifically the German Shepherd dogs, I think that is where you have the strange Nazi occult tie-in. And again, I haven't gotten any sort of like straight answer as to the reason why this specific breed, other than they believe that it is the most human-like because they're very intelligent and they have essentially this is the best that they can do is get closest to a human sacrifice is through the Alsatian dog. So that was interesting to me. And
that
again,
is interesting. I think the mad scientist of the Occult Rejects here, Lisa, has proposed a similar hypothesis regarding these are some of them. There was some level, something in the blood with how they get connected to folks, but there was some function with dogs that they had a higher concentration of some chemical released in the bonding. I think I'm not a scientist.
Yeah.
She had a very. I'm doing a horrible job. She had a very scientific explanation for these things. So
sounds very.
But I think that is. I think these are what you're saying is kind of in that line with that. I think there's something.
That's what I was getting out of it too, as well.
Yeah, I think so. And I remember that Maury Terry brought up that Stanley Baker, right, the cannibal, who that always blew me away because this was all in kind of context. The context was describing these further underground chapters of the process and spin-off groups that were kind of using other names at the time, but were being well established in all throughout California, basically, and
precisely.
And they were finding. Basically, these authorities began to find all of these mutilated and decapitated or exsanguinated dogs is what was being discovered. And so
absolutely. And I always challenge folks who question these things. I'm like, just go on, look at newspaper searches specifically for Putnam and Westchester County in the 70s. You're going to find an inordinate, just a wild amount of 40 dead German Shepherds found at one time. I think is one newspaper article, right? Like one, like, the remains of 40 dead German Shepherds, right?
Yeah. And that's what really was so crazy about Detective Rothstein being tipped off by his CI, by his criminal informant at the time, because he shows up in Untermeyer and he just discovers this mass grave of German Shepherd dogs. And instantly, I believe there was a building that was affiliated with the process, the local chapter that was very near that area where he discovered that mass grave of German Shepherds that were near the area of the Devil's Cave, which made a lot of sense, especially because out of the Carr household, it did seem like there was some sort of intelligence operation being conducted through the Carr household that were connected to, John Carr, and they were all connected into the Magical Child bookshop or whatever it was called that John Markham was a part of. I think at a certain level, if I remember, he was actually a part of that business that was being ran through that bookshop, which I thought was interesting.
Well, that's interesting because Berkowitz identifies Herman Slater, the owner of that bookshop, as a member of the process and the children offshoot of the process. And Maury Terry would famously go on TV, debating Herman Slater. Numerous, Maury Povich kind of shows there in the early 90s. Herman Slater was like, "Oh, it's all satanic panic." Well, now you can see why he's saying it's all satanic panic. And I wonder at what point in time Maury was like, "What the fuck? I knew that asshole was a member of the cult." But before we get back to Markham here in the 80s and the McDonald case in Gunderson, while we're on the Atlanta child killing stuff, and also on the cars, Dana Ronnie Jules has done a great job at documenting the Scientology connections, not just Michael with the cars, and asking, bringing up some legitimate questions around some of those activities there with the answering service, etc. But in regards to Atlanta, are you familiar? This is actually from her Wayback Machine files that she's got listed on her link tree. Are you familiar with this report from the Kelly private detective company? I'll make it bigger. In regards to the comparisons of the Atlanta child killings and the Son of Sam murder, since you were talking about both.
No, I don't think I've seen this.
Bring this up. It's called, that ain't it. It's called the, let me see if I can get a bigger. Here we go. The G. Kelly, and this is the cover letter for the report. We'll go over some of the details. This is the March of 1982. So this is like right at the end of the Atlanta child killings, right? What was the dates on those?
Yeah, that is exactly the dates. I mean, honestly, if you as far as it was 79 to 81. So yeah, that's perfect timing. You know what I mean?
So apparently this G. Kelly and Associates, this is a big kind of a corporate kind of PI firm situation. They I used to run a PI firm, but it was just me, so it's nothing comparatively speaking. But enclosed, please find an addendum to our original report on the Atlanta child murders. Our office is constantly receiving and developing new information relating to all aspects of this case, including videotapes, which will be of interest to you. So apparently they were hired to investigate the Atlanta child murders. And again, this is a firm out of Kingston, New York. So
my God.
And again, they were in their report, they compare the Son of Sam and Atlanta child murders. I'm sure Maury Terry was connected to these folks contemporary to this time, but I'm just saying, like, it's new information for many people,
Oh yeah. Yeah, no doubt. And when you consider the fact that you have that the satanic cult connection to the process came up with Shirley McGill. That was the interesting tie-in with Shirley McGill. She's a Miami drug informant, criminal informant. She is the one who basically claims that there is this through Parnell Traham is essentially, she had a boyfriend who was tied into. Not only was he abducting children and kidnapping children for the local chapter of the process, and tied into the Wayne Williams network, which is
really just Michael Thieves, right?
Exactly, which is really just John David Norman's Odyssey Foundation in many ways as well, because that was a huge facet of kind of, I think that's a massive tie-in to the pedophile underworld, kind of linking John Wayne Gacy, Phil Paskey, who very much
who knew Ace Brown, Jim Rothstein's source that took him to Untermeyer Park.
Brother Paul Bonassi from the Franklin scandal claims that John Wayne Gacy and Phil Paskey were entirely implicated in the abduction of Johnny Gosch, which ties in obviously Jacob Wetterling, all these the paperboy fetish that was apparently. This was the paperboy fetish.
That would not surprise me if the network of these folks is really that small. They like, people are like, oh, those are household serial killer names. There's no way they're all involved, but that's why they're household serial killer names, to dispel the actual narratives for what's going on here, right? Exactly. Nick's a former magician there. He would agree with me. Probably that's all part of the magic show, right? Selling this false narrative, right? Real details, real people, false narrative surrounding it to package it improperly, so you'll never understand.
That's what I think. Besides the legal stuff that the Process Church is doing, I think the occult side of that is also helping sell a different image to the public of what's really going on. You need magicians for that. Absolutely. CIA love magicians too.
Oh man, I've seen many different claims. Now, I do believe that there's obviously, a major. At least there is definitely a group of individuals involved and affiliated with the cult networks that obviously believe this ideology and practice this philosophy and truly, genuinely, authentically are pursuing, these principles, but these occult principles. But I also definitely believe that there is an aspect of this that is provided for deliberate deception, that is attempted to kind of throw the average individual and the just as far as the mass public is concerned, the general public, they will view this and dismiss it at face value because it seems so extraordinary, right?
Yes. Yeah. You know what I think? They're so good at it now that they make money off of the bullshit story that they're even selling to the public.
Oh yeah, Nick's done a good job of tracking that. He's on to something with that for sure. And it makes sense because that is, in my opinion, how the process functions economically speaking. And you know, I don't want to go on a weird economic tangent here for even my sake or anyone else's. It's fucking boring. But folks can listen to my esoteric review of the film Inherent Vice, and I describe how the film Inherent Vice is describing the process and the economic aspects.
I love Inherent Vice, actually. Like Paul Thomas Anderson is one of my favorite directors of all time. Now, I'm not at all, kind of like giving a character analysis of who I think he might potentially be as an individual, but I do think that his artwork.
Like, I hear you. I do the same. I approach it the same way. Like I like to watch Tom Cruise play a tall man who knows how to fight on TV.
Yeah, right.
You're on the movies, you know, buddy. And he's often in Paul Thomas Anderson films, right?
Oh, dude, Magnolia. That's one of my favorite all-time roles of Tom Cruise. He's just giving seminars on how to be the most belligerent piece of shit male that you can possibly attempt to become.
Big time. But to the point where they make this a utilitarian, literal term of the process is utilitarian speaking. It's like they don't. There's not a portion of the hog that's not unused. They use all of the hog. That's how I say it. So.
Yeah. For
example, with the film Inherent Vice, you see the same cult that's that has infiltrated the political and law enforcement aspects of Los Angeles has now also imported all of this heroin, has now instituted the whole system in which you'll get hooked on the drugs, you'll go to the rehab, we'll fix your teeth once all the calcium, gets, sucked out like a vampire from the heroin, right? And then they'll repeat the whole process again, the literal process, right? And that is the goal that they described to Paul. So Paul Thomas Anderson wrote that. Film director, screenplay. Thomas Pynchon wrote it. Pardon me. Not contemporary to the Manson family murders, but he lived in Los Angeles at that time during the Manson family murders and subsequent trials. So, and if you notice in there, he embeds so much Manson lore and other things in there, and they're always referencing the Manson family various times. So what I think, again, is the esoteric understanding of that is he's describing the process to folks and how it really works.
It's
the mob, it's the cops, it's the politicians, right? You know what I mean? And it's the economic. He's describing the economy aspects of it, right?
Right. Dude, that sequence of Martin Short as the dentist, and he goes into then they get pulled over by the cops. It's one of the funniest scenes, honestly, that I can remember.
Oh, dude, that movie's so brilliant. I'm so glad now you've seen that you enjoy it, because I've only ever met one other person, and that's the person you got compared to at the beginning of this here tonight show, Austin Recluse, Mr. Steven Snyder. He also shares an affinity to this film, and in fact, that's who I've done the review with.
Wow, man, that's amazing. I didn't even realize, but yeah, it's a fascinating film, and for some reason it was very appealing to me from the first moment I ever but without any real context, it was blowing my mind, and just that I had a very high appreciation for the comedic value of it as well, because honestly, it is very funny. But
it's one of my, it's literally my, I mean, what you're saying is it's music my ears. It's literally the same thing I think about the film, and a lot of people shit on the film. Like, it's my favorite. It's possibly my favorite movie. It really is.
I love it.
Like I said, I was a former, after I retired from the Air Force, I ran a private detective agency for 4 years. And, so I had a very like molecular level in my DNA, like, a pot smoking PI detective, involved in this shit. Like, of course I'm going to enjoy that film. What are you talking about?
Right. Exactly. The fog sequence with Owen Wilson, and it's like
the whole, it's a brilliant movie, dude. Super brilliant movie. So as we're on the subject, so you see Wilson in this kind of COINTELPRO situation, right? He's a Laurel Canyon musician who faked his death, and he was a surf sax player, but he was still a Laurel Canyon musician who fakes his death, and he's infiltrating the scene through I think they show you 3 in the film and 4 in the book. 4 different identities, working for the cops, working for the cult, working for
showing up
working for everybody, right? He's got a different idea, and then the only person who really knows the inside track is just this weird, random girl, right? You wouldn't think would have any knowledge, right? But she has the whole picture, and that's the main character's girlfriend, right? And she's of clearly they don't describe it, but she's with her name. She's clearly of some sort of wealthy family, right? She's a blue blood lineage with her name, right? So that's what I'm saying. There's a lot of stuff really embedded in that film. But if you see him as the COINTELPRO guy, right, which is how that is what's going on with Wilson. Then you look at Doc Sportello, right? He's a private detective operating out of a free clinic, right? It's Los Angeles, but operating out of a free clinic where he has his office, right? So he's clearly Operation Chaos for the CIA, right?
Oh yeah, dude. Yeah, and then Josh Brolin's character as well, which is just
that's one of my favorite. I'm a big Brolin fan since Goonies, but that's one of my he absolutely kills it. Nick, have you not seen this film at all? It's it is obviously not designed necessarily to be a comedy, but as Austin pointed out, it's quite comedic.
Very much so. It is, and it also provides a window into how clandestine operations work domestically and how they kind of utilize these assets, put them into position. Once again, kind of the deliberate deception. You see Owen Wilson's character showing up at these politically televised events and causing this right as if he's the face of political dissent in this very fashion, and it's obviously an entirely staged event. And he himself is absolutely compromised and a part of the performance, and that in itself. I'd like to ask you guys, because I think you're both probably very much kind of like attuned to this level of just the way we should kind of engage with reality itself, which is, what are your thoughts on this sort of intersection that I always seem to find myself at, where it's like the intersection of culture creation, social engineering, covert intelligence, clandestine occult ideologies that are clearly attempting to stay below the surface of public awareness, and then this strange, like, you have the intelligence operations kind of utilizing this esoteric occult doctrine and these ideologies, again, essentially subconsciously initiating people using various methods of that is where
drinking that Kool-Aid also.
I agree, man.
Exactly.
Yeah, whenever you even
that's a great question. I know it's something Nick and I certainly discuss. I apologize, Nick, go ahead. But I was saying we definitely talk about these subjects for sure offline, right?
Yeah, whenever you see like institutions or places that are known for like putting shit out there, there's always like an occultist like involved. There's always like a government person attached to it. And then like the thing is, some things I do wonder about. Like I even wonder with like especially with like the process. I do wonder if like it's like some of these, like a lot of times you also see like these things that they're doing on the side that's like making money illegally. Like are these like things that you're even doing to fund what you're doing, even though I'm sure the government, say CIA or someone's already fucking funding it.
No,
you're making weird that you great point. Offshoots of like them somehow making illegal money too. It's very weird.
No, that's a great point. That is kind of how this money laundering Iran-Contra operations go with these matters, and what I would again assert is kind of going on with the Idaho-Contra situations. But when I say we talk about these things offline, I mean like literally like an hour, like 2 hours before the show started, Nick and I were having a conversation, literally talking about how there's always these occult magicians involved in all these spook operations. They're the ones that are selling you the magician's distraction and packaging things in the way that folks will never truly understand what occurred there.
Absolutely, man. And
were you listening to that conversation, Austin? Is that why you asked that question? Because that's literally like right now. I'm just joking, but I'm saying like literally like we talked. It may not even been 2 hours, may have been an hour. Like that's literally it's nice. It's nice to hear other folks reaching that kind of same conclusion with things, because to really, obviously, even within conspiracy culture, I think a lot of folks still chase the shiny objects. You know what I mean?
Man, that is very, yeah. That I think that, I don't. It's kind of, it's something that's very refreshing to be able to have a conversation like this, man. Like I appreciate you guys very much, because this is why I started a podcast.
Awesome.
Yeah. I was so desperate to have worthwhile conversations with people who are passionately and objectively pursuing the truth, like
for sure, man.
That's the ultimate objective. I just want to conceptually outline these things for myself to where at a fundamental level where I can kind of like engage with reality in a way where I feel like it makes, as far as just, I feel like it actually applies, you know, and it's not a part of the manufactured delusion, right? I want to opt out of that. Right. And so that deception alone, you know, at every level I want to reject, you know, and so it's just, again, something that breathes new life into me every chance that I have to have these conversations, because it's like, man, I was spinning off the planet just alone, like trying to workshop these ideas and vomiting vomiting the ideas onto my wife while I'm pacing in the front room. Like that, basically that was my lifestyle.
I mean, what you're describing, Austin, is precisely why Nick and I even started this Friday show. Was you know, again, because you know, we don't have any really agenda or plans, or we just, you know, whatever the guests of whatever podcast host or content creator we're having on that week, whatever they're interested in is usually where we kind of start off. But I mean, we ventured into weird territories, and we're saying, you know, largely where we were planning on tonight, because again, this is all very much within the same sphere of what we're talking about. That's a process term. If you read their incorporation documents, the spheres those are, that's their regions. But no, it's great stuff. I mean, I appreciate that. So again, that's why I started a podcast as well. Back actually, I just surpassed 9 years, despite you know, I had an intermission for like 2 years where I was only doing kind of guest appearances on shows. Like you mentioned William Ramsey. I've been a big fan of his work for many years, and
I love William.
Was a frequent contributor on there for many years. In fact, he's recently posted some of his old episodes where that 2-year hiatus. We did a whole series on sci-fi and how that came from L. Ron Hubbard's little crew, where they were all members of the Agape Lodge with Parsons and Hubbard, and then they were all early Scientologists. Man. Strangely enough, I don't know if William heard my show 2 weeks ago on Operation GCD, but I did a continuation of that kind of conversation. I started off with him a number of years back, but regarding the is DC and Marvel Comics thematic fan fiction, and it all comes from the same science fiction club that presented all these ideas of space to us. But they were all Thelemites, and then they were all early Scientologist folks, and seemingly a lot of them all kid diddlers, strangely enough. Which again, I think goes back to these kind of Crowley concepts of rooted. I'm not saying it's all ritual magic. I'm saying, you know, there is a bit of that within their, you know, their thought process. That's part of their religion, I think, you know.
No doubt. And modern Babylon is how I see it in many ways. And, you know, man, it's very disturbing once you kind of like realize the level of sadism involved with a lot of this underground occultist. It's not even just the occultist framework. I kind of think, once again, it's like you look at a Michael Aquino and the Mind War and the Psychology of Victory, and you're like, is the Temple of Set just an intelligence cutout to some extent?
Part and parcel, man. Part and parcel. Look at the work of his. Oh, go ahead. No, I was just saying it's part and parcel, right? It's the same. That's what I'm saying. I think a lot of times we get too wrapped up in these names. Like, well, they say they're the Temple of Set, and like, well, so I look at things fundamentally speaking, like, you know, garbage. GCD's garbage can dude, but when I also like to say it's the greatest common denominator, because that's how I kind of look at all crime in general, but parapolitics, and you know, they're doing the same shit. It's the same. We're just you know, we're quabbling over terms that they're doing the same activities, and it's the same business, right? And you can kind of demonstrate that more with Aquino and his daughter and his son-in-law, and they're, you know, big in the at least the son-in-law seems to be big in the neo-process movement with his associations of Boyd Rice and veneration of Charles Manson. I know Dana over at Rodney Jules went deep on Nicholas Schreck the other day, so I didn't even get to finish all of it, but what the parts that I did listen to and watch, it was some fantastic stuff. And again, that's what I'm saying. You know, that's a good example. This is part and parcel of the same business, because he was Church of Satan, and he was Temple of Set, and now he's like, I'm just doing my own thing and whatever. Dude. It's all
from my experience in the OTO, I think that there's a possibility that the CIA or some agencies involved in that at this point.
Yeah, it's all the same stuff. When we're on, and look at Aquino. So we're on Aquino. You know, Nick, you've done a lot of work on Lansdale on your show. In the past.
Edward Lansdale,
kind of the predecessor, right, and mentor.
Yeah, it was Aquino before Aquino. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, that dude.
Speaking of the magic, right? Can you describe some of the Lansdale magic we're talking about with deceiving people?
Yeah, well, there's a few of them. One, I don't know if it was helicopters or planes. They were flying those over like these villagers' houses, and they're like, you know, playing like all these like ghost sounds and all these like weird noises, and basically telling them like if you kept on I think housing. I don't know if they were called the Husks or something. There were these group of people that they were considered like communists, but a lot of people say they were just regular farmers minding their business.
Right.
Yeah, that
terrorists is what you're saying.
Yeah. That if they kept on housing them and protecting them, they were gonna get like haunted and this and that. All this fucked up shit was gonna happen. And then they hung like a few people like up in the jungle, like upside down, and bled them out, and started a rumor saying that vampires did it because they were like helping the people doing stuff on people's houses and stuff. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
It's basically weaponizing the local
shit out of these people
against them, right?
Yeah. That's what it was. They used their own folklore against them, saying that like basically their own spiritual weird beliefs, like, you know, we have all those like small little things like in certain towns and stuff. They're using that like against them to like make them feel bad for what they were doing.
Of course, man.
So I think
ideological.
Aquino did that, right, and added his weird Satanism stuff on top of that, right? But then technically those guys learned from a fellow by the name of Paul Linebarger. So during World War II, there was a guy by the name Captain Paul Linebarger. He wrote the U.S. Army Manual on Psychological Warfare, called the U.S. Army Manual on Psychological Warfare. Not a fancy title.
Right.
So he was college roommates with L. Ron Hubbard. He was also later part of that same science fiction writers club under the name Cordwainer Smith, right? So we're talking these matters of psyops and hypnosis, because Aquino loved hypnosis. You know, we're talking about and psyops, so we're talking about the same kind of things as far as these matters of deception, right?
Layers of deception, my friend. That is all that I consistently witness as far as I'm concerned. Knowing the fact that all of the flying saucer mythology comes from essentially the Agape Lodge in many ways, like it very much does. And that's fascinating to me. Jack Parsons, Caltech rocket pioneer, high priest of the OTO, you know, at the time. And obviously until he had the falling out allegedly with Aleister Crowley, which how many of these falling outs are we intended to believe or you know, it's like, I don't know. I'm very much in question of this.
I'm glad you brought that up. And again, I don't hate to keep plugging my show, but I unpacked some of those false narratives around that whole Agape Lodge, the interactions and dates around Hubbard and all these things last week on my show, Operation GCD Live, the DC Marvel Comics, the limit fan fiction. Cause, you know, there's a lot to be said there. We don't still understand. Are you familiar with the name Frank Molina?
Yeah, I am.
Right. Actually, so then there's Parsons number 2, and that's Ghislaine Maxwell's sister-in-law's father-in-law, right?
Dude, it's never ending. And this is another reason why, like, you look at Iran-Contra. Iran-Contra is really just kind of like a branch of this network. Like, it truly is. It's a window into the network. It's fascinating.
Exactly.
Ghislaine Maxwell's sister.
Oh no, for sure. Let's put a pin in Aquino and Fort Bragg, because we're going to circle back there through Idaho Contra here. So please, continue on that train of thought, that this is Idaho, that Iran Contra is an offshoot of these same activities, because we see a focus of Maury Terry's Ultimate Evil book as a fellow by the name of Cocaine Bob Evans. His name, not mine. I'm just respecting wishes of the dead. Right. Cocaine Bob is clearly a major figure in the process in Los Angeles, right? His business partner for the cocaine trafficking surrounding the murder of Roy Radin and known as the Cotton Club murders was known as Laney Jacobs, but her real name was Karen Greenberger. And she was the wife of the Medellin cartel's #1 dude in America.
God, you're killing me, man.
You're not familiar with this narrative? So
no, I'm aware of so many of the other details, like Bill Manson too being heavily involved. Obviously, is the hitman for Roy Radin and
very important factor.
Yeah. Working for Larry Fink or not Larry Fink?
Larry Flint. And,
that was it. Yeah.
I unpack all these details. Folks can understand that this storyline that Austin's describing in the film Dragnet, the 1987 comedy masterpiece Dragnet, starring Dan Aykroyd and Tom Hanks. These details, they literally have essentially Bill Menser in the film. He's played by Jack O'Halloran.
Dude, that is so crazy. You know that Arliss Perry, right? The Arliss Perry murder that happened on Berkeley campus, right? In the UC Berkeley's chapel, right, where she's ritualistically murdered. There's like a candle inserted into her vagina and like the an ice pick on the back, I believe, and then she was spread out in a specific way where she was basically a symbol, an occult. It wasn't a neo-pagan symbol like the Delphi murders, but it was very similar.
Wow.
And knowing the security guard, right, who did the rounds, Stephen Crawford. He seems to be somewhat indicated or implicated as far as being, at the very least, he had Maury Terry's book opened up on his on a desk when the authorities came 30 years later to attempt to follow up with him as a key suspect, and
right
side when they're at his door, which to me seems like very much a convenient manufactured mythological tool to facilitate the cover up, because I kind of feel like Stephen Crawford.
There you go.
Maybe he killed
dead men
himself.
don't talk, do they, Austin? There's
Exactly.
a lot of folks in that area that did not want that fellow talking.
Exactly. That's what I view as the potential reality there. But you look even further into, right, Bruce Perry was Arliss Perry's husband at the time. She's 19, right? I think she's very young. And he's very young as well. He's covered in blood. When the authorities find him, he claims he had a nosebleed. And it turns out Bruce Perry, later on, that's William Mincer, right?
Good luck finding photographs of him, not from the newspaper and not from his one mugshot in 2000. They don't have. You can find his name in the prison system, him and Greenberger both, but they ain't got no photos of either. It's been erased.
You know what's crazy though?
Went the way of Houdini. They said, "Poof, we don't need any more Bill Mincer. We don't need any more Manson too. You don't need to learn about these things."
By the way, he was tied into. Well, it was either Magic Island or the Wonderland Club. I think it was the
Magic Castle, I believe. Or no, you're right. No, Magic Island. I think it was the name.
Magic
of it, right?
Island,
it was a hypnosis place, right?
Yeah, in Newport Beach. This was a network where they were facilitating snuff films. Roy Radin apparently he ordered specifically the Stacy Moskowitz, I think, was the one that the son of Sam David Berkowitz murders, that was ordered by Roy Radin for snuff film purposes, which was why the van was stationed outside of the murder scene, because they had a tripod in there and they were actually filming it for the Enterprise. And that's another facet of this, that again, snuff films, an urban myth, right? We're intended to believe that this is, which obviously at this point we all know these exist. And beyond that, man, North Fox Island proved, the Francis Sheldon Network, that they, and John David Norman and the Odyssey Foundation, they were running, the advertising the Delta Project, which was just another name for the Odyssey Foundation, John David Norman's network of abducting children and trafficking them for sexual abuse and ritualistic snuff murder and all of these various. More than that, even you think about potentially organ harvesting, which is something that I think people need to understand.
There you go. They're using the whole hog, aren't they?
Exactly,
it's the whole hog concept.
Yeah, and so Arliss Perry's.
I think you're spot on there. But if I may, Austin, if I may just redirect you back to Los Angeles and the trafficking of cocaine around Bob Cocaine Evans and Karen Greenberger, who now Bob pleads the fifth in the grand jury testimony, despite being the first witness called by the prosecution. Under advisement of Robert Shapiro, that is. This murder of Roy Radin occurs in 1983, right? Mm-hmm. The trial they don't get popped until 1988. Now this happens 6 months after somebody killed Karen Greenberger's husband, Larry Greenberger, on their porch in Lake Okeechobee, right? That death occurs 6 months after Larry Greenberger is identified in the federal court case against Carlos Later, the co-founder with of the Medellin cartel with Pablo Escobar. Carlos Later is the focus of the film Blow with Johnny Depp. Right?
You tie all that into Barry Seal and
it absolutely all ties in. But absolutely, so Cocaine Bob is doing process activity in Los Angeles. The murder of Roy Radin, right? Where this dude Bill Mitzer's the hitman, right? And in prison today, right? Bob walks. He pleads the fifth, and he walked on cocaine trafficking. He walks on murder stuff. All of his indicted conspirators, they all went to prison for life, right? So this is a year after the release of Dragnet. So in the film Dragnet, that's Bill Mitzer. Then you have Jack O'Halloran here, right? They got him made up strikingly similar to Bill Mitzer. Jack O'Halloran's character is the driver and bodyguard for a pornographer. Bill Mitzer was the driver and bodyguard for a pornographer.
Yes.
Larry Flint.
And that is so crazy.
And it is all connected, because when you're talking about Wayne Williams, his boss, Michael Thievis, and whatnot, and a fellow by the name of Mitch Warbell, who kind of floats around that circle out there.
He's everywhere.
Mitch Warbell's murdered in Los Angeles 6 months before Roy Radin, apparently poisoned by Larry Flint's brother-in-law, allegedly.
Yep. I'm telling you, man, like this is a network that, yes, it is far smaller in scope than I think people realize as
Absolutely.
far as the usual
Absolutely.
suspects. And that is why you
Absolutely.
can kind of tie a direct line into all these various scandalous cases that occurred around a similar time in American history, which very much seemed to spur a lot of the satanic panic, alleged mass hysteria, which was apparently unfounded, which obviously in my mind was just a natural reaction to true instances and examples of ritual occult murder and satanic ritual abuse, you know, that has been proven to have existed. Even looking at a finder's cult connection, what the sacrifice of Henrietta and Igor, the goats that they sacrificed and had the children. Apparently, one of the children cut out baby goats out of the live goat's womb.
That's some trauma right there, right? That'll induce some trauma.
I think that's all part of MK Ultra.
Has to be.
You know, you got to have that trigger to induce the trauma, right? It happens in varying ways and capacities.
Yeah.
Like I said, Nexium was forcing folks to watch snuff films. That induces the trauma there. So you need that triggering device. But, you know, I like what you're saying also. I just want to see if I can go back here to, I just want to hammer home that point that you're already hitting on. I want to hear more of your thoughts on with this Iran-Contra stuff, because Cocaine Bob's doing business with a Medellin cartel around the Roy Raiden murder, but that does not really get that recognized, right? Karen Greenberger is the wife of the Medellin cartel's #1 dude. He's found out in later's court case. He gets popped 6 months later. She's now the #1 suspect in that murder. Why she wasn't then, I don't know. But when she's questioned by police 6 months after that murder, she thinks that they're talking to her about her husband's murder, right? When she's not thinking they're talking about Roy Raden's murder that occurred 5 years prior, right?
Yeah.
And all of these things are being prosecuted by a fellow by the name of, damn it, I just forgot his name. Charles Manson's friend, who solicited Charles Manson to get on the defense team back in the 72 trial of the Manson family. He later became the district attorney of Los Angeles.
Not Bugliosi.
No, he worked. He was not. He wasn't in the office there during Bugliosi's time. He was a defense attorney in the Manson trial. He was friends with Manson and asked Manson, "Hey, get me on as one of the girls' defense attorneys." Wow. I think he was defending. Instead of me guessing, let me just look it up. It's Ira. I get his name mixed up with that one serial killer from Philadelphia. Is it Ira Einhorn?
Is it Ira Aker or something? Is that
Ira,
the name?
Ira Reiner, former LA District Attorney Ira Reiner. So he was one of Manson's personal friends. Manson had a litany of weird friends, right? I guess, but
absolutely.
He was the Los Angeles city attorney from 81 to 84, and the district. He got elected district attorney from 84 to 92. So let's play a trivia game here this late in the show here, Austin. Keep everybody on our feet, including yourself. Can you name the weird parapolitical and or satanic crimes that occurred in Los Angeles between the years of 1984 and 1992?
Man,
you don't have to name them all, but let's just take a couple stabs. I bet you can name some good ones.
Finders, Franklin, McMartin, right?
Specifically in Los Angeles County. So you got McMartin,
specifically in Los Angeles. Okay, yep. McMartin.
So under Charles Manson's friend's jurisdiction as the district attorney, right? You got McMartin that gets prosecuted or does it, right? Because right.
Interesting. I don't know.
That was a big satanic panic. HBO made a movie. James Woods played in it. I think Oliver Stone directed it. They're like, hey, this is that helped fuel the satanic panic.
Now, Presidio was,
and it turns out McMartin wasn't bullshit, was it though? Right?
No, not at all. Yeah, and I think that even having the obviously we had the seismic survey and the underground, survey of the tunnels that were clearly filled in with foreign dirt, which obviously they had built-in tunnels to what was described as the neighboring properties, where they would then utilize as far as yes, they had occult rituals underground, but for the vast majority of what they used the tunnels for was to take the children in real time in daylight, right when they're supposed to be at the actual preschools. They would then kind of traffic them through the underground tunnels. They would pop up in a let's say a neighboring private residence. They would apparently there was a tunnel access to one of the garages where they would then be effectively trafficked through the neighboring community. And that is essentially what had happened to a lot of the individual children witnesses who claimed that they had, definitely been trafficked at that time through neighboring garages that they had been apparently utilizing the tunnel system for. So that makes sense, especially considering what was the name of the Manhattan Beach investigator? Paul Bynum, I think was his name. And he basically went up there and to the Manhattan Beach McMartin preschool property and discovered all of these dead rabbit carcasses and dead turtles shells and all that had been essentially sacrificed. And so he was just kind of corroborating a lot of that evidence. And then it turns out just before he's set to testify, he allegedly shoots himself or commits suicide. And apparently his entire family and everyone close to him says that he had everything to live for. There was no reason for him to have done this. He just had a newborn baby. He was in every way, attempting to become a father and very excited about this prospect. And Paul Bynum, it turns out that, what was on the initial and direct perpetrator's desk whenever they apprehended him and raided his residence. On his desk were the actual investigative files of a Paul Bynum who had been executed, but obviously allegedly committed suicide, but was the key investigator who was going to testify and corroborate a lot of these child victims witnesses' accounts. And so again, he had claimed that he had actually gone to the property, found that there were tunnel systems that had been filled in just recently, and that he had discovered actual carcasses of ritualistically murdered, rabbits and turtles. And again, he's discovered dead. And there are many other deaths that are connected into McMartin that happened at that very time. So
that was a great explanation. You know where I learned about that McMartin stuff that you just described? When I first learned about that stuff was on the Opperman report about those tunnels and the LIDAR reports and everything else. So once again, a nod to the Opperman report and the history of what Ed's brought to the table. So that's so like you're saying, a lot of that stuff was we had there's demonstrable evidence produced, some weird deaths, and yet yet HBO is telling everybody, well, no, that's fake news. That's
satanic.
James Wood's telling everybody, Oliver Stone's telling everybody. That didn't happen. It was all satanic panic.
Which Oliver Stone is such a strange suspect as far as like why I understand, like, he doesn't seem like he's operating in good faith at every instance in my mind. And then just like researching about what he had said to Howard Hunt when he was talking to him about doing the I think it wasn't the Nixon movie. I don't think it was. I think it was the JFK movie, but it might have been the Nixon movie when he had Howard Hunt that he brought in personally and asked him, how much would I have to pay you for you to just tell me the whole story? But still, I think that even what's his name, who played Jim Garrison in JFK, Kevin
Costner.
Yeah, Kevin Costner. I heard by St. John Hunt, who's Howard Hunt's son. I heard him say, now, of course, this is very much in my mind, obviously some bias information that as far as how it's coming toward. But again, how would you approach the son of Howard Hunt? I don't know. I mean, you would think you would be at least somewhat respectful if you're attempting to, kind of like.
Well, if you want a legitimate response, you better be diplomatic about it, right?
Exactly. And it seems like Kevin Costner was very much in his ego and also kind of like belittling St. John Hunt and kind of like putting Howard Hunt in a really difficult position. So they kind of backed out of offering, kind of more of the details that they would have provided otherwise, which I found interesting. But still,
he does play some weird roles, doesn't he? He does play some weird roles.
Absolutely.
So, steering us back to this Iran Contra business, Fort Bragg, Michael Aquino coming out of there, the McDonald murders, right? We were talking about with the the seemingly processing, Gunderson, Alan Dershowitz, and, of course, the process attorney himself, John Markham, helping cover this, and Tuesday Weld's cousin, Bill Weld, the U.S. attorney, being involved in that mix. All these folks helping cover up that end of this kind of narrative, it seems, right? As Jeffrey McDonald still sits alive and well, Green Beret doctor, who, again, is professes innocence from day one, gets prosecuted, I think, 7 years after the fact, right? Down there at Fort Bragg. And,
that was really a fertility death ritual in a way as well, right? It wasn't only they're prioritizing and targeting him because he was willing to basically, he was described as a golden boy, where he which is interesting by even the military brass at the time, right, who were working at Fort Bragg, and it seems that he was moonlighting at working at another hospital. I forget how far away it was from Fort Bragg at the time, but
dude was hard charging, man. He had a lot of good things folks said about him for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, there were 2 heroin addicts who brought in an individual who overdosed, and to that very hospital he was moonlighting at, and he had just kind of a status quo policy in place where if this occurred, they would notify the authorities, the local authorities. And so this was a huge problem because the individuals who brought in this guy who had overdosed were affiliated with the local narcotics distribution aspect of the covert operation being conducted in Fort Bragg at the time, which were connected to what was called the cadaver connection. And this was very interesting to me because I didn't realize until I had stumbled across Prince Beasley, this retired Fayetteville, North Carolina police detective officer who had a criminal informant by the name of Helena Stokely. And she was his informant, I believe, from like 68 to 72. And she tells him that basically the drugs, mainly heroin, were being smuggled into the U.S. in the body cavities of these dead soldiers from Vietnam. And these drugs were being brought into the country in U.S. Army planes, and basically that there was a way that they would the tags that were on these coffins was how the individuals would actually who were the assets that were operating this, helping facilitate this domestic drug smuggling operation. Right. They would meet the coffins and effectively they would know which one were actually holding the heroin that were coming out of the Golden Triangle, but also Thailand, I think at the time as well. And so
if I may interject there, Austin, these allegations around these same style of operations you're describing have been alleged around Minot Air Force Base and John Carr in the Son of Sam situation.
Yep. Exact same thing. They said that, by the way, that's a crazy story because I discovered that what's her name? Donna Loria and Jody Valenti, the Bronx victims who were, so one of the possible motives for their target.
Yeah.
Do what?
Nice. You're back.
Good.
One of the possible motives for the targeting of Donna Loria and Jody Valenti in the Bronx in 76 was basically because Loria was an ambulance technician who might have become aware of a drug ring involving the Nugan Bank that imported Golden Triangle heroin into the U.S.
Are you serious?
I swear to God. So
I did not know that. I did not know that, sir.
Right?
And there we are back to Idaho in more drug trafficking, these processed satanic crimes, right? And around all of these. And then we're back to Idaho with Nugan Bank, aren't we? Because John Michael Hand, Green Beret, used to work for Lansdale and the military assistance or whatever, component over there, doing those operations, Nick, that you described.
Yeah.
John Michael Hand was a major figure in those Lansdale operations you described. And then he would go on to, what did he do? He started a bank, the Nugan Bank, isn't that right, Austin?
Yeah, and if you realize
what was the Nugan Bank and what happened to it?
So, this is crazy. So in 73, Frank Nugan and this Australian lawyer and Michael Hand, who's a former CIA contract operative, they established the Nugan Bank. And this is just fascinating to me because the Nugan Bank was involved in helping the CIA in covert arms deals with contracts and contacts with Angola, which again, keep in mind, Jonestown, right? The Angolan rebels trained at the Jonestown site, which was a black site to begin with, to train up the Angolan rebels. Operation Shalom. It's just ridiculous to me. And so again, we just have another perfect example of how Iran-Contra was just a branch, kind of like it just evolved. It was already a playbook very much, being utilized, and it effectively evolved over time and became Iran-Contra, of course. But that was only a window into one of the scandals that it really was kind of
we see it erupt to the surface and we call it an Iran-Contra. We think we understand it, but what you're describing is we don't have a fucking clue because it's still going on today, right? So the elements you're describing: Fort Bragg, special forces, money laundering, large-scale drug trafficking, right? Probably some gun trafficking, maybe some human stuff there in the mix. All of these things are surrounding these Idaho 4 murders that occurred on November 13th, 2022. Right.
Wow.
They're all fraternity and sorority students, and the Greek cultures up there are long steeped in a large scale drug trafficking network. I would allege they were possibly laundering their money at a FTX owned small rural bank where where they were washing the money cash for crypto. Right. So Sam Bankman-Fried partnered up with Sam Bankman-Fried files bankruptcy on November 11th.
You mean Diddy's cellmate?
Well, you're about to get us lost in it. I will go for another hour on these connections with Diddy, Sam Bankman-Fried, the same attorneys. The one of the lawyers prosecuting the case that used to work for the now University of Idaho president for this weird firm that was doing the merger between Binance and FTX that fell out on November 9th, and then on November 11th. FTX files bankruptcy, emergency bankruptcy. The whole world finds out that they bought this small rural bank. Everyone loses their shit. In any regulatory position. The bank seized 6 weeks later for money laundering. His partner in that bank is a creepy French fella out of the Bahamas and a different bank. He's got direct connections back to BCCI and the Iran-Contra.
There you go, brother.
That's not the only Iran-Contra scandal connected to Idaho, though. I'll give you another one in a second. So that creepy French fella also invented the cartoon Inspector Gadget.
Wow. I still think that that Inspector Gadget might possibly be who was that MK Ultra scientist? Gottlieb.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, because Gottlieb had a daughter named Penny, I think.
They called him the Black Sorcerer or something of
yeah. The thing is, he was making gadgets before he started making those like cocktails that was like supposedly going to kill someone because they smoked a cigar or got fucking jabbed in the ass.
Wow.
Yeah, like he was making all like these there was basically like almost like shit from not 007. What was Mission Impossible with all these fucking shit. That's what the guy was doing, and he had. I'm pretty sure he had a daughter named Penny, but like Inspector Gadget, I think that's his niece.
That's interesting. So I've actually said, I've actually wondered what did this creepy French fella see or witness to develop this cartoon, and you're saying it might even be based on Sidney Gottlieb.
There was times I remember a year or two ago when we brought it up on the Occult Rejects. There was a couple of other things that tied to it because I did go down like a small rabbit hole when I caught like one or two commonalities, and I was like, I think there's something here. I think when I did a damn MK Ultra series with Thrash. There is like one or two other things that doesn't make it like really like
that is amazing. That is interesting. We might have to unpack that in a future show here, Nick, because I do like this idea around this creepy French guy. So they're involved in money laundering. That stuff's been seized. No one's really gone to jail though. So then you have the University of Idaho president who was for no reason did they hire this guy properly. Like he has no background to be there other than being a graduate, I suppose. He was a business fellow, largely in banking. He was running the second largest corporate law firm. They're largely involved in regulatory things within the U.S. government surrounding crypto. So he leaves that company in 2019, takes the University of Idaho president job, I think 2018 or 2019. It's the same time that Sam Bankman-Fried and the creepy French fella are paying off the state regulators in Washington state to change the law so that a crypto and banking can be under the same roof. Wow. Mind you, that's still against FDIC regulations, but that didn't stop them.
Right.
From the larger outlook, it seems like a operation was unfolding. This dude's moving into that position, et cetera, because it's that law firm that's managing the merger between Binance and FTX that falls out on November 9th for the emergency bankruptcy. So they play an important role, even though the president had left the firm already. Now, he gets to the University of Idaho and has the bright decision, I'm going to go procure the University of Phoenix. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the University of Phoenix. There's not really any infrastructure. It's basically just an idea and a lot of presumably probably money laundering. But I'm a Phoenix proud. I have my undergrad and grad from University of Phoenix because it was on every Air Force military installation, and
that's crazy.
They kind of it's right available to you, and you don't pay anything. You know what I mean? So it's very much pushed through that regard. That's what I'm saying. Like they're getting a lot of federal money. I have to wonder there's some sort of like money laundering mechanism there, but he solicits and you're going to recognize this name from Iran Contra and probably Jeffrey Epstein. Leon Black and his Apollo Global Management firm to finance this deal. He goes into business with Leon Black.
That's amazing. I didn't realize this. Now I knew he had a connection directly to the CIA through like his kind of molding process, where he was like basically brought under the wing during his schooling and whenever
you talking about Sam Bankman-Fried?
Yeah, SPF. Yeah.
Oh, are you familiar with Leon Black there, real quick? He's
I'm familiar. Yeah, absolutely.
He's directly involved in Iran Contra and is deeply involved in at least $200 million in avoiding Epstein charges thus far. But yeah, SPF actually works for that. So you're familiar with some of his background? He's got a weird background, right? The Stanford parents and everything.
Very strange. Yeah.
He's actually working at a small Wall Street firm where he's on record for losing the most amount of money in that firm's history. And he's working along with one of the major figures in the Zizian transpocalypse, vegan, Silicon Valley based, rationalist,
I gotta look into this group because I haven't yet, and all I keep hearing is about the Zizians, so I know they have a connection.
I'm not even trying to brag. You got to listen to the one that we did.
No, I'm trying to brag. You got to listen to the shows we've done.
I'll listen, man.
Yeah,
I'll listen.
It's much deeper than what you'll find on regular YouTuber.
Awesome.
Nick and the Mad Scientist went deep for sure on some of their stuff.
Yeah, those kids. It's another one to get, and not to get too much with the true crime stuff, but it's just another one with why is NASA popping the fuck up?
Yeah.
Oh man.
Absolutely.
Why is NASA by the way popping up with all these weird true crime tales now? There's always associated with NASA fucking showing up.
The Jet Propulsion Laboratory was as far as like even seeing.
There you go. From the onset with this Thelema, right? With Parsons, right?
Part of the magic.
Exactly. And
the bullshit story you're buying, I think.
Was it Jack Parsons was affiliated with this JPL property in Florida in the Everglades, and that came up on Python Cowboy went on Joe Rogan, and I discovered this like a while back, a couple of years ago, because it sounded very interesting to me, and I don't usually even listen to Rogan anymore, but occasionally I would catch an episode, and I caught this one, and I discovered that he was out there as a conservationist attempting to wrangle these pythons, and was basically granted access onto an old government black site. And this was effectively a JPL, a Jet Propulsion Laboratory property that was in this area of the Florida Everglades, where he was hunting these pythons with a couple of his buddies on his team. And they go into this area and they discover this property that seemed to have been abandoned, but very much so. Obviously, there were people who were actively, apparently, at least gathering at this area for some sort of occult reason. And this is interesting to me because he finds, like, to begin with, he finds this strange baby doll. And there's like this, what looks like blood that's kind of like in symbols and also like leading to a direction into the complex of the property itself. And he discovers this baby doll that has one eye missing. I think it was the left eye.
Where was this, Austin? This was a JPL facility in Florida. But
yeah.
Do you recall? Like, did it have a name? Maybe.
Let me pull up because again, it's like a black site within the Florida Everglades.
Yeah, when you're starting to talk black sites in the Everglades, you're starting to sound like a lot like Wayne Williams stories and Patrick Hemming with the anti-Castro Cubans,
Lucas, who's saying that.
Lucas.
Yeah, he's saying that we were trained in the art of kidnapping and ritualistic murder and how to properly abduct children and that was all at black sites in Mississippi and Louisiana, where basically. Absolutely. They were granted apparently they were all tipped off whenever military flyovers would happen as well, and so they would effectively be able to cover their tracks from any aerial viewpoint whatsoever to consistently utilize the black site, which that makes sense in terms of how the David Ferry and the Louisiana CAP, right, the Civil Air Patrol were operating at the time, because even those children, he was using sophisticated mind control techniques on those children in the hypnosis. He was hypnotizing them and then raping them as well, which I didn't realize. But
that goes hand in hand. Doesn't it every time? I feel like, right? It's always some weird sexual diddling stuff. So, and folks want to write off hypnosis. And I was was telling Nick this story earlier about hypnosis, and the actor Danny Trejo. Folks can go on YouTube. I'll pull up a link and put it in the show notes. Danny Trejo is describing the time that he met Charles Manson in the LA County lockup, and they were all strung out, needed some dope. Right. They were all dope heads, and
crazy story.
Manson's like, oh, it's cool. I'll take care of you. I'll hypnotize you, and you'll feel like you were on dope.
You were on heroin,
and it worked.
He said, "Man, what did he say about Manson? He said, if in another life, right, like he should become a professional hypnotist because he missed his calling." Like that was basically what he said about Charles Manson, because
he was like I was describing him as like a 5-tool athlete. These prospects go. He did all the occult stuff. He's doing the hypnotist stuff. You know what I mean? He's a charismatic fella, despite being a little fella. You know what I mean? He's he got a lot done.
All right,
big dreams.
I found this story that this Python cowboy told, because it's fascinating. It's this abandoned Aerojet rocket test facility that he had discovered. Apparently, he came across this one night in April of 2019. And this is deep within the he's chasing.
You want to share it?
Sure.
Yeah, we'll put it on the screen here. Let folks check that out.
He's chasing these invasive python species.
So he's a python hunter, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so this is so crazy. Look at this. First of all, this is what he stumbles upon, and who knows? The upside down crosses and red, but so he basically says that. He finds this abandoned Aerojet rocket test facility, and then essentially he discovers that an interesting snake still alive that is on this baby doll. I need a picture of the baby doll because it's super creepy, man. But basically what he finds is this rock pile, and a small scarlet snake wrapped around the neck of a baby doll, and it's bleeding from its anus and still alive, which he had never discovered once in his life, which in my mind seems like the scarlet snake that came up in the Marc Dutroux affair, where in the context of the X dossier. Oh, geez, chill out. In the context this was a JPL property though, huh? At one point. Yeah. And had direct ties to Jack Parsons committing occult rituals at the time, apparently whenever he was affiliated with this property. So I found that interesting because it clearly had direct, occult connotations to prior use. Right.
That's super interesting. And I'll put for folks of the interwebs, I'll put a link in the show notes here. I'll get it from Austin here. But no, this is what I'm talking about, man. There's so many more of these sites that were clearly being utilized. This is larger as we're clearly laying out for folks. This is a much larger network than even some folks in conspiracy cultures I think are willing to recognize. And if I may bring us, did you have any more points on this site specifically?
No. Honestly, it's probably too long of a story to even cover, but it's very interesting.
I was going to say, I'd love to have you back on here in the future, or Operation GCD, or even, I don't want to speak for Nick, but maybe even the Occult Rejects.
I was already thinking of it. Yeah.
Okay.
I love you guys. This was a lot of fun.
We can unpack some more of these ideas, but I'd like to try to close out some of the ones we've discussed tonight, if you don't mind, and bringing this in for a close. So when we're talking about these similarities between the Atlanta when we're talking about this, hold on one second. We're talking about Fort Bragg, drug trafficking, money laundering, the continuation, as you're saying, of Iran-Contra, and this is kind of one component of it. And I was describing the drug trafficking, the money laundering that seemingly may have triggered those murders that happened within 48 hours of everyone finding out about this money laundering bank and whatnot, and the president's connections, the Iran-Contra connections. Well, on top of that, you have the Moscow PD, Moscow, Idaho. They said, you know what, this is the biggest crime in state's history, certainly the town's history, most certainly, but the state as well. And, let's get the best man on the job. So they find the rookie cop and put him as the lead detective. Wow, and you may ask yourself, what's his qualifications? Well, I'll tell you what his qualifications is. He was stationed at Fort Bragg as the paratrooper, and then went into the U.S. Army military police and became an officer, where he exists today as a seemingly holding a top. I mean, I don't have his documents, but from my understanding, from my time in the military, if you're an officer in the MPs, you have, even in the Air Force, you have a top secret. So he seemingly may have gotten selected because he had that clearance, right?
Do you mind if I go take a piss real quick and come back so I can form the rest of my thoughts in a coherent way without having to think about having to piss really bad?
please do one. We'll bring it in for landing here when you get back.
Brother. I'll be right back. Appreciate it.
So, I'm dude. That's it's I like to see some other folks. You know what I mean, coming to these well developed and thought out conclusions as he has around some of these subjects and the dynamics that they clearly in play. But it just seems so obvious to me at this point, looking at a lot of these factors that like Austin saying it, Iran-Contra didn't end, and it's really just a component of what we're seeing here surrounding elements of the Idaho situation.
Something that I've thought before with like the Masons, just from seeing like different things popping up, stuff that I haven't even covered, that I'm starting to like maybe I guess entertain more, like especially with the process and a few other, I guess, supposed occult organizations. I think it's almost like they're used as like they're so diverse to where it's like they have the street thugs that do like the street shit, all the way up to the director of the narrative.
Yeah, well, you're given your background, you're probably familiar with the and where you came from in life. That being around Long Island, where a large concentration of La Cosa Nostra folks are from, right? Like you're probably familiar. That's how they operate, right? What you're describing, right?
Yeah, a lot of the ways to get away with stuff is because, well, I mean, you could just be a good manipulator, but I mean, a lot of times it's like being out in plain sight, hidden in plain sight. There's a lot of that, but I do think that comes even from like an occultist in a sense. But no, I feel like looking at like the Process Church, the Freemasons, and a few other organizations, again, especially cults. I feel like you do have like you will have all the way to the top the person who's helping design the bullshit story, all the way down to like the dudes that are doing like the street, legal crap, moving this and that, low level.
For sure.
And then I think the reason why those things are so great too is because you may not have any tie to this person except for that lodge or that organization.
That's the best way to do it, right?
But like how is that person even coming up in your life?
Diffuse liability, right?
Yeah.
So I totally agree with you. I think that is, that's how they operate. We were talking about kind of the, the general function of some of this stuff, comparatively speaking, to like the mafia, right? They see this cult network, I think we apply a lot of descriptions to name things, but we're really just talking about the same stuff. But I definitely appreciate your time here this evening. I appreciate you joining us here. But I would like, as we're bringing this in for landing, I want to make sure I went back to here and get your Nick's thoughts both on some of this comparative nature of this report from this private detective agency from New York that did a comparative analysis of the Atlanta child killings and the Son of Sam murders, right? So I'll put a link in the show notes, but it says here Michael Carr and some other associates of Berkowitz incorporated a Buddha figure in their ceremonies in the same manner, according to Shirley, as you mentioned before, the witness down there, that it was used in the Atlanta ceremonies.
God, that is fascinating, man. I already knew of obviously of her direct connection into this kind of Parnell Traham cult. What she was basically claiming was her boyfriend was directly tied into this what really ultimately fundamentally it becomes this criminal syndicate enterprise, which plays very much into not only what I view government as in the first place is just the highest level of organized crime. And so that's truly how I feel. And I think you're not wrong. I mean, it's honestly, it's obvious at this point that they very much utilize the same playbook, and they kind of reinforce each other's existence. And it was seemingly, you see so often that there are these warring factions, but it's typically below the surface of public accountability. There's no real acknowledgement of the general public understanding how power truly functions in the first place. But yeah, you talk about how there's this undeniable occult connection to a local chapter of the process affiliated with Parnell Traham in the Atlanta child murders, were knowingly abducting children in Atlanta for the network to then be taken by, let's say, Wayne Williams, who's at least presenting himself as a talent spotter for young children who can I forget what the name of his group was called that he was bringing them into, but even the name of the group was kind of if I remember correctly, it was a kind of an occult connotation in general as well, which was strange. But this was a group that he claimed he would be able to, of course, set these children on a path to stardom with their musical talents, and that and inevitably he would take them to Michael Thevis's a local production studio where they would then perform in child pornography, and that was inevitably what Michael Thevis was a child pornographer, a kingpin at the time in Atlanta, and so
he was kind of the big time, overall. And at one point in time, when Larry Flint paid Mitch Morbell $1 million check to off his competition, not on that list, not listed was Michael Thevis. It was Guccione, Hugh Hefner, and somebody else. But Michael Thevis wasn't on the hit list, strangely enough, and he definitely knew Mitch Morbell because they were both out of Atlanta, right? So, Michael Thevis, major figure. He would later sell his home to, I believe it was Whitney Houston and Bobby Brown when he went to prison in one of his stints. And relative to modern era, folks like comedian Joey Diaz has joked around on his own podcast about being a cocaine mule for the Whitney Houston and Bobby Brown, flying them cocaine in various cities and whatnot.
I didn't realize that he claimed that. Now I knew he was. That's crazy stuff right there.
That's wild, right?
Yeah. Oh my God. I know that, just as far as the they're kind of the modern day like tie in to the BCCI Iran-Contra scandal that's still effectively taking place this very moment. I think my favorite example of this is really Omar Mateen and the Pulse nightclub network. In very many ways, I think draws in Wackenhut, which just like Permindex was obviously a plausible deniability construct in the private sector, and if you consider the Arliss Perry murder that we were just discussing earlier, her husband Bruce Perry. Now, I didn't realize this. He happens to be the psychiatrist in charge of treating the children at Waco.
Yes, sir.
And it was even crazier than that. If you look into this guy's background, it turns out that apparently Bruce Perry was also, he served as an expert witness in all of these insane scandals involving these traumatized children, including Columbine High School massacre, Oklahoma City bombing, Waco, the YFC ranch custody cases, and the
Mormon fundamentalists. Let's not, the Jeffs. Let's not sleep on that situation. That's a fucking strange one, right? No, it's weird. He's involved in all these things, right? It's very, very bizarre. Very bizarre, especially given where he came from with the.
Exactly.
He's there at the Perry murder, right? He should have been considered a suspect. Man. He wasn't.
Right. Wasn't. They had just had a fight as well, which is very strange, but
very strange.
You look at the execution of Roy Radin happened on Friday the 13th, right? 13 bullets to the back of the head. A Bible left near his body, open to a passage from the book of Isaiah, chapter 22, which reads in part, "Let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we shall die." And it gets so much.
So there's some Christian stuff mashed in there you're identifying, right? Within that ritual human sacrifice. And then we got a report here saying they're doing, mashing together Buddhist stuff in the mix, right?
Yeah. Oh, they do say they're in the OTO, they still say you'll eat and feast for death.
Man, so this kind of works within the framework of your understanding within Thelema, this incorporation of Buddhist stuff.
Yeah, well, I also think Thelema ripped off Catholicism. Bible anyways.
Interesting. Okay.
Ideological deception at every level, right? It's like that. I feel like they attempt to infiltrate presiding ideologies, whether they were manufactured to begin with or not. I don't know which one, obviously.
Sure.
But it's
what came first, Bill Clinton or the blue dress, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. But I mean, and even then, the Royal Institute of International Affairs and the Committee of 300 and the Club of Rome, and how basically Bill Clinton was chosen as just like Jimmy Carter was, right? Jimmy Carter allegedly just a dipshit peanut. I don't know. It's very, very.
He wasn't allegedly. He was a dipshit peanut farmer from Georgia. I think that's
exactly.
I think he was the Lodge of Georgia or whatever. The whatever they call their top Freemason, they're in the Grand Lodge of the state or whatever.
Man. And that's what always consistently, raises its ugly head is this sort of just direct connection to these powerful, let's say they're just very much they're powerful organizations as far as just their influence on the global infrastructure, really just like the path of what is becoming.
For sure.
Yeah. In my mind, you look at even the OTO. Like I was realizing that it was founded in 1895, and
by Theodore Russ, right?
Yeah.
And Carl
who reunited the Illuminati, right?
Exactly,
the Bavarian Illuminati.
man.
Yeah, those are dudes from there was like it was actually like aligned with Freemasonry.
Yeah, that was the very interesting point that I discovered as well, was that it seems to be not only affiliated with, of course, this kind of like psychological operation being conducted by the MI6 at the time, which I think that is why Aleister Crowley effectively fell into that position, because I think that he was kind of being utilized as the asset, within the terms of British intelligence. But this chapter of the, I mean, you just there. Then these are like what. I believe the individuals themselves were kind of like coming out of these really what inevitably have fundamentally turned into these neo-pagan ideologies that are being resurrected in modern day. And I didn't realize this until I discovered now obviously I'd mentioned Wackenhut being orchestrating essentially the Omar Mateen Pulse nightclub shootings. We can get into those details at a later date if you would like.
That sounds like a great way to put a pin in that, and put a pin in this picture right here. So no one could ever explain why Cocaine Bob Evans here, Mr. Process Hollywood, was so good friends with Henry Kissinger, right?
Right.
Then you see Kissinger's right-hand man, who was the VP of Kissinger and Associates, who was his deputy national security advisor, who was the national security advisor for, I believe, Ford and Reagan, and that was retired Air Force General Brent Scowcroft. And then his assistant starts a neo-process cult, JJ Bryan, in Victorianism. So if folks wonder why no one hears about these things and really doesn't understand them, it's because in my opinion, they're being stamped national security. Like Iran-Contra was stamped national security, and like I believe Idaho 4 right now, the Idaho Contra is being stamped national security around these matters. And this is my favorite picture to demonstrate old shirtless Cocaine Bob and his hugging on his friend Henry. But because it's dark, right? Knowing whatever these fellows know. But I think that's what you're talking about with this Wackenhut, Promise Software stuff, Michael Reconasciuto, the Octopus, right? So that all ties into the ultimate evil there, right? Because Reconasciuto and Gunderson are providing information to Maury Terry and Ed Sanders over the years, because apparently Reconasciuto was in the Tate and Ashbury working COINTELPRO for Gunderson.
Yeah. And I really can't stand that. Now I understand why people would be skeptical of Reconasciuto, because he has such a strange background. He's obviously involved in covert operations. He was clearly an asset for the intelligence community, but he was hung out to dry. And I think so many of them are effectively hung out to dry because, and when they are framed for domestically trafficking heroin, right? Like a Reconasciuto who's like, yeah, I was doing it for the CIA, right? And then
right.
Yeah, when he gets
underwater LSD labs, dude. I mean, this dude's advanced. He's no rookie. He is no rookie.
He's the one working at the Cabazon Indian Reservation, providing the back door for the Promise Software scandal. Yeah. And I mean, he claims that's where it was done, which we know at this point the CIA was actively flying in Mexican nationals to cook methamphetamines on the Cabazon Indian Reservation, and they were utilizing these Indian reservations for clandestine black operations within the domestic context. That's really what they were doing. And I mean, we're talking esoteric weapons being, at least being, effectively pursued and at least tested at the Cabazon Indian Reservation. And then, by the way, BCCI ties directly back into not only what was being conducted through Iran-Contra at Cabazon, but Paul Wiltshire and the Wiltshire Report that was sent to Janet Reno, Attorney General at the time of Waco. And through this connection, it seemingly it looks like this individual named Gunter Karl Russbacher, who was allegedly a CIA covert domestic black operative, he apparently was the individual. Now, Paul Wiltshire, by the way, who was presented to the task force who were investigating the October surprise during Iran-Contra, where the hostages and all of this is being the negotiations are taking place. He claims that he was the CIA covert operative who flew the George Bush Sr. and a lot of different individuals apparently into Paris for the alleged meeting, right, where he flew them across the Atlantic to
I didn't know
France.
that story.
Yeah, and he says that William Casey was on the plane, Donald Gregg, Robert Gates, all these individuals. We have like let's see who else.
That's the who's who of scumbaggery, if you ask me, in the Iran-Contra scandal. And I'm glad you brought that up, because if I may just put a quick note here on the Iran-Contra in Idaho, John Michael Hand of Nugan Hand Bank would be found living under a presumed identity in Idaho Falls, Idaho in 2015, 35 years after his constituent, Michael or something Nugan, commits suicide. He walks on, like Epstein, like Cocaine Bob, like Leon Black, like a lot of these folks. They all just happen to walk on major charges of money laundering, cocaine trafficking, and murder. I'll just give me 1 second. I'll be right back, fellas.
Oh, you're good, buddy. Man, I'm just saying, like, as far as Waco specifically, though, I couldn't even believe that through this Wiltshire report, I discovered that allegedly Koresh and 6 others in the Branch Davidians that were a part of his inner circle, according to this Paul Wiltshire report, they were deep cover CIA operatives who had refused an order to activate against an unknown target, and that they were actually developing an explosive device at the Branch Davidian complex. And this was a part of their MK Ultra conditioning. And that apparently a lot of the Green Berets had been conditioned in MK Ultra as well, as far as these sophisticated techniques, and that they were then waking up from their prior programming at certain levels, which was very interesting to me. That even Ruby Ridge, right? Randy Weaver, even Randy Weaver,
back to Idaho.
Yeah, even he was mentioned as potentially being basically conditioned in these mind control techniques, and then that due to his wife Vicky, he was waking up to these prior conditioning techniques and his prior programming, and therefore she became the priority target whenever they went up to Ruby Ridge, was because he was effectively rejecting his programming of apparently committing some sort of domestic terror operation, which they could drive to kind of exploit in terms of PATCON, which was just kind of the right-wing COINTEL program that was being ran at the time, kind of staging OKC, which obviously, led to kind of the what was the initial legislation that became the precursor to the Patriot Act, obviously. But within the context of
1995 legislation presented by Joe Biden.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it turns out
Terror Act, right? And if I may just one note, if I may, you're blowing up my brain all here, Austin. And we're still almost 3 hours in. You're still successfully doing that. So when you're considering, because I as much as I've thought about Idaho Contra and all these other weird activities around the situation, I just right now when you're talking, I just considered John Michael Hand, former Green Beret, Weaver, former Green Beret. They're both in Idaho. Like, you're going to tell me these folks aren't communicating or somehow interacting with one another, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's hard to imagine that they wouldn't be, and right. Especially how, again, this is a subset. This is a very small portion that people don't realize is it's an exclusive community of individials, right, who are very well trained, and I think understanding what Tim. Yeah, and Tim McVeigh said the same thing as far as the Green Beret training, that most of the Special Forces operatives within the context of this elite group of Green Berets were definitely forced to go through this mind control, sophisticated programming techniques, and that
was requirement as part of their training.
Exactly, that's what they said, and so makes a lot of sense to me, and for. Again, this Wiltshire report, which came in 3 separate parts, that claims that David Koresh was a sleeper who had been subjected to extensive CIA mind control training and programming, and that apparently Waco was a major center for such CIA mind control experimentation and programming, with much of this activity occurring at the CIA's Leadership Management Institute in Waco, the LMI. And
I'm gonna have to ask you to cease and desist and blowing up my brain hole at the moment, sir, because you're one of the few, if not the only one, that wants to bring up weapons trafficking around the Waco situation. Because that's what I've looked at what those Branch Davidians were doing. They were selling a lot of guns.
Oh yeah, they were. Absolutely.
Right? They're selling my fucking gun shows, weren't they?
You can tell me Christ stuff all day long. You say, the government never reached. These people either were in bed with the government trafficking weapons in and around this Iran-Contra stuff, or what were solid or witnessed it. And I say that to make this point: the main weapons, small arms weapons depot in Iran-Contra was being run out of a place called Camp Bullis. Wow. It's an Air Force training installation on the outskirts of San Antonio, Texas.
Yep. That is crazy.
Not that far south from Waco. If you want to go to and from the border, perfect pit stop.
Exactly. And also, what else was named within the context of this? Not only the CIA was utilizing the LMI in Waco, but they named in this report Salt Lake City, Utah, Provo, Utah, Logan, Utah, and Boise, Idaho.
Get out of town, dude.
Get out of town. I swear.
Come on now, dude. You just identify. And Nick lit up because we've talked about all these locations relative to the Idaho Contra stuff. So that's what I'm saying. You just hit on a lot of targets there, man. I'm gonna have to ask you for a copy of this report.
I'll send it to you.
It's fucking amazing, man. That's great stuff right there. I'm gonna have to dive into some more of that. So, if I can bring this again, appreciate all of these details and conversation, man. It's great stuff, and I'm gonna say I'm gonna go ahead and look forward to our next conversation. I'm gonna say I'm not gonna let you leave after the show. I'm not gonna let you leave until we book something for the next conversation.
Awesome, sounds good.
You're being held hostage until then, because I'm sure Nick feels the same way. Looks like by the reaction he just had. So no, I definitely appreciate all this stuff. I mean, the chat seems to be very loving all your the details you're dropping. A lot of details. I love details. I'm a details-oriented individual here.
Appreciate you guys. Honestly, you're blowing my mind as well, because I feel like whenever we have a meeting of the minds like this, each individual goes down different paths of research and investigation. And so we have so much, I feel like we can provide to fill in various holes that we might not have realized, and you seem to fill in quite a few different holes and within the context of the puzzle pieces that I'm considering in this wider network that seems to be well established and very much connected, right? So I'm down, brother.
So when you're talking Timothy McVeigh, we're talking Iran-Contra, we're talking about the use of flying drugs into this country. Now, folks may not realize this. His sister did it. Do you familiar with this document? His sister's deposition regarding these matters?
Yep.
Jennifer McVeigh, would you like to describe this for the folks of the interwebs there also?
Just reading through the original New York Times article as well that came through that proved kind of Tim McVeigh's he was essentially having like an emotional breakdown. He really it had to do with his his grandpa as well, right? Which was very interesting as far as the connection there to him essentially, really just having to tell someone about this clandestine life that he was living, right? And at the very least, he seemed to have needed to get something off of his chest, which I found fascinating, right? That he kept telling. Sure. At least attempted to tell some people, even his mom and sister, right after the fact, claimed that they were being surveilled very heavily, right, within the context of the federal agents who were obviously affiliated with attempting to keep this all undercover, facilitate the cover up, right, in many different ways. And so, I think that it's very strange to see that he was actually claiming that he was flying in drugs and basically, running Iran-Contra, right?
Right here it's quoted as saying, it's crazy, right? So if you on the way we're sold these narratives, it seems to be Looney Tunes, right, Nick? Was that what you were going to say?
Yeah.
No, go ahead. What'd you have to say?
Oh, nothing. No, I was actually just sitting up to.
So he says number one, we would be helping with the CIA fly drugs into the U.S. to fund many covert operations, Iran-Contra. So I think that's very fascinating. You have a guy who's been apparently sheep-dipped through Army Special Forces. You know what I mean? Again, speaking to how these kind of matters work. And again, Austin, I don't want to shorten this conversation more than I have to, but I do have I have to go. I have another show. I have other things I need to tend to here. Speaking of Idaho stuff, I like to recommend folks going to check out Kane B's The Purge. I was over there earlier today, providing my Idaho 4 weekly dissertations, and going back over here this evening. But I would like to put the pin in this subject right here for our next conversation, if you will, sir, before we have some closing remarks and whatnot. But have you heard the name Edward Wayne Edwards?
I don't think I have, honestly. I'm not sure.
He's perhaps the most prolific serial killer you've never heard of, and apparently many people may never hear of, because the private detective, or the former homicide detective who wrote that book and had that website there, Cold Case Cameron, apparently the website's now down. But here on the web archives, I'll leave a link. You will find he's done a whole study on this serial killer's background. Now, he alleges he's involved in all these murders, including the Zodiac, and we'll get into that too. There's some great evidence of that. That at least
we're talking about Bill Mincer being the Zodiac. Have you heard that? Just people like claiming that he was potentially involved with some of the Zodiac killings, which I found very strange. But
it's intriguing. But so if you're familiar with the Lake Berryessa guy, the details he gives the victim are all details of Edward Wayne Edwards' life. He broke out of Red Lodge Prison in Montana. There was a prison guard murdered. He stole a car. He drove to Mexico. That's August of 1969, when in reality, that's when this guy in the hooded mask tells the victims of Lake Berryessa, one survives, right? And that was, in my opinion, that was a snuff film. The folks on the boat nearby that never helped the victims, they were filming. So the reason why during the daylight you have a giant knife and a mask, because you want to obscure the man's identity and you need to be able to see the weapon from a distance.
That's fascinating, man. And now I know that Detective James Rothstein claims that not only Jeffrey Dahmer, but the Zodiac was directly tied into obviously the Son of Sam killings, which he claimed the process was, the coalescing organization that drew them all together, which that's perfect. And in my mind, it makes a lot of sense. But what do you think about the Zodiac just being, like many of these cases, kind of not responsible for as many of the deaths that they claim? And obviously it was some sort of potentially targeted assassinations, executions, ritual snuff murders as well. But obviously they're pursuing the same
as, you just identified it, man. It's the same MO, right? We've been discussing. It's the whole hog approach. It's a team of killers. It's not one killer. I would argue the man in the mask was Edward Wayne Edwards, because again, the details he gave were actual details, but they were from 10 years prior. Edwards did those things in 1959. He was the #1 suspect on the FBI's most wanted list at the age of 22.
Oh my God. Wow. That's crazy.
He later inserts him, and he grew up with Charles Manson at the Chillicothe Boys Reformatory.
No.
Can't make the
You didn't go to Boys Town, right?
they both went to Boys Town, in fact. Yes, sir.
What the hell, dude? You're killing me. That is fascinating.
During the Atlanta child killings, and I give John Cameron he takes a lot of flack. He did a Paramount Plus series with Edward Wayne Edwards' grandson, and and again, he may have overstepped some of his theories with John Benet Ramsey and everything else that he accuses Edwards involved, but I think he nails it, because Edwards is like a general in that hand of death cult you were referring to, right? So I look at him as a general, right? And I'm happy. That's what I'm saying. Let's put a pin in some of this stuff, but I want to leave it here. He invades the Atlanta child killing task force as a Marietta police sergeant.
Oh my God. Hold on. What is his name? Full name right now? I need to know.
Edward Wayne Edwards. And I'll send you a link to all this stuff.
Thank you.
I'll even send you a link to the time where he got himself on the TV show, the game show. I'll find it. Him and Alan Alda. Alan Alda's one of the celebrity guest people on the. Yeah, while I'm meandering about my thoughts here, I'll find that clip real quick. But this is him with the Atlanta police captain, right? So he had a relationship with him, because when he was the #1 FBI most wanted dude, this is who busted him in Atlanta, I think in 1962. So he's back there later. This is during the child killings. He's taking a photograph with this dude, right? This dude's protege is running the task force. Edwards infiltrates that task force wearing a Marietta police sergeant's uniform. That police sergeant's uniform is found in an arson back in Pennsylvania in 1983. When they're investigating the arson, he didn't do a good. Ed wasn't as good as he thought he was. He didn't do a good job. The uniform was still in the closet. They then find him. The FBI finds him and arrests him, not at this dude's house, but at a Marietta police sergeant's house in Marietta, Georgia, in 1983. So That's why I want to put a pin in that stuff, because again, this is the man here on the left who gave the details of Lake Berryessa accurately to this man's description. He just it was the wrong time.
Mind blown,
wrong time.
brother. Yeah, truth is far stranger than fiction. Right?
Oh man. So if I can ask again, I appreciate your time, Austin. I look forward to the next conversation. But this conversation was fantastic, and Nick, as always, I appreciate your insights and time. And these ideas of mashing together some of these occult practices were seemingly strange to me, but I think Nick has a much better understanding. I think along these lines of Thelema, to understand that may be more practical within some of their boundaries as far as incorporating the Buddhism and the Christian stuff. So
yeah, for sure. The Buddhism,
great insight. If I can offer some closing statements to you there, Austin, I'll look for that Edward Wynne Edwards clip while you're doing that.
Awesome. Yeah. And I'll send you those at least a few of the sources that I was utilizing earlier that you had asked for, because again, it's like anytime we can kind of, bridge the gaps and attempt to at least coalesce and bring these thoughts together and fill in these various holes and again provide the puzzle pieces necessary to understand in a better, more conceptual way.
I could have stated it better myself. That's an excellent way to phrase it.
That's the goal, right? And that's all I can hope to accomplish. And again, you guys, man, thank you so much. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you guys for just giving me the opportunity to come on the show and have a platform to have a conversation that's worthwhile again, because this is all I really hope to achieve at this moment, because I'm under no real delusion that I'm going to personally have some sort of like, a profound impact on the way society is heading. It's like sure. I'm not at all, but I do have an objective in mind, and that is just to spend my time, pursuing these avenues of interest that will hopefully provide more of a conceptual understanding of and a far more plausible alternative version of history and reality as we face it today in modern terms. And I think that much of this has been through the occult lens, utilized to deliberately deceive us into falling into traps ideologically and facilitating the very system as it is currently structured. And so anytime we can kind of like pierce through that veil and provide a window into the that this sort of psychological covert, it's a psyop, but cultural engineering as well, like social engineering, cultural creation.
That's the process, right? Social turbulence, the paper written by Eric Trist or Alan Trist. Alan
right.
Trist.
Yeah.
One was the dad who came over to him, who was from the Tavistock founder, who wrote the Social Turbulence paper, which seems to be what the purpose of the process is. And then he just happened to come to America the same time as the process and go to UCLA and work with Louis Jolyon West.
Of course. Yeah, which, by the way, he has files on the Waco incident as well. And it turns out that he's implicated as potentially being involved in treating David Koresh at a certain point. So I'm not sure. I still haven't found like direct corroboration as far as the evidence is concerned to prove that out. But I know that when they raided his files at UCLA, the Waco children were a huge part of one of those files. And even in the finders, right? What did they find? Peer-to-peer communication network and a computer system set up, private computer nodes set up in 1987. This is unprecedented in many ways.
Yep.
Set up in communication with an asset in the Chinese embassy to procure children. Yes, from the Chinese embassy.
It's a dark consideration to consider where that may have evolved to, since it goes unchecked, right? But I totally agree with you on the concepts of working and interchange of ideas and working with folks, and I greatly hope you'll join us again on future conversations here on Fridaze, the Operation GCD Live, and of course if Nick will have both of us maybe over there in the Occult Rejects, we can have some Occult Rejects assaults on these topics. I'm obviously being facetious, Nick, but
man, again, thank you both. Honestly, I appreciate you both, and it's nice to officially meet you guys. And again, this was a very, very easy conversation. I feel like it flowed very well. And, you guys are easy to talk to, and I can't thank you enough again, man. Appreciate you guys.
No, thank you for coming on, man. That was fucking amazing.
So I'll have your links in the show notes. Do you have any plugs here before we depart? And on Nick, then obviously, obviously before Nick and I make some statements. But yeah, do you have any last plugs there, Austin?
Really, the best place to find me is the Underclass Podcast. I think the best place to support me, if anything I've ever said has resonated with you enough, and you have the means available to send anything my way, then of course patreon.com/the Underclass Podcast, the best place. I at least have some sort of incentive in place as well for any sort of supporters that want to, at least kind of like, I think it's interesting. Well, first of all, I have a paywall show called Whatever This Is with Brad Binkley and Sam Tripoli. And that has been like an extraordinary blessing because, again, they're both people that I admire and I think are willing to have objective and open-minded conversations and consider new ideas. And again, anytime that you have the ability to pursue this in that fashion, then I feel like that is the divine path of some kind, right? I'm not sure exactly how to explain it, but that's how it feels.
No, I like the way, I like your style there, sir. I like the way you think.
Thank you, brother. But yeah, again, thank you guys so much, and that's basically my plugs, and I appreciate you guys. So I'm eager to have another conversation. So we'll get that scheduled for sure.
For sure, dude. For sure. Nick, greetings, sir. I always appreciate our Fridays. I always have a good time. Look forward to these things. I learn new things every week. This week, perhaps I learned way more than I even expected. So that much I appreciate as well.
Thank you, man. Me too.
Any closing comments or plugs you got there, Nick?
No, just anything. Tomorrow we're going live with Ryder Lee at I think 12 or something around there. I don't know. You'll see when I make the live to talk about Virginia Guthrie. And then Sunday, we got a bunch of us going on. Donald Ferguson is a fan or listener is coming on to blow our minds with some stuff. I think people will really, really enjoy it. I think I'm going to have Ricardo there and Lisa. So I'm going to have those two brains as well joining Donald. So it should be pretty mind melting. So definitely check this out Sunday. And that's about it. Thank you both, man. Austin, thank you so much. That was like fucking
for sure.
A lot of information.
Thank you, bro.
That's
and I appreciate both of you, gents.
Pretty fucking crazy.
What's that?
I said you remember him, but just as much as JJ does. That's pretty fucking crazy.
I like the details, friend. I like the details, and I appreciate both your gents' time and conversation, and the folks of the interwebs as well. And I just have a quick parting words, and that is check out Operation GCD Sundays this Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Oh, that's next Sunday. This Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on my Patreon. On links in the show notes here. The Curse of Robert the Doll. I mean, I guess technically I call this the Curse of Buffalo Jared Revisa, but this is far more targeted and far less mystical, but equally as scary. So, and where we'll pick up on the next one there, Austin, is Edward Wayne Edwards. And let me just show you this brief clip.
Let's see it.
Of his appearance in 1972 on the game show To Tell the Truth. Right? That's kind of a oxymoron.
Yeah.
Number one, what is your name, please?
My name is Ed Edwards.
Number two.
My name is Ed Edwards.
Number three.
My name is Ed Edwards.
Would the real Ed Edwards please stand up?
Right.
So, we'll definitely have to dive into that. I've been fascinated with Edward Wayne Edwards for years now, so it's something I enjoy, and certainly happy to share it with the rest of the conspiracy culture when we're not, when he hits so many of these different categories among so many of these things, and somehow still goes largely undetected. But
right,
awesome conversation. And if folks in the interwebs want to check out some Idaho 4 stuff tonight, I'm heading over to Kane B's The Purge. And Austin, if you feel like getting into some Iran-Contra, Idaho Contra type conversations, you're welcome to join us over there. I want to invite you on the host part, Kane, but I be happy to, because he would love the conversation if you join us. And Nick, as always, I hope to see you there.
Yeah, I'll try.
All right. And on that note, thank you both for your time. Thanks, folks, to the interwebs.
Well, that's it. That's the show here, folks. So the next time you're out on the town, visiting your local watering holes, or perhaps just meandering around, and you hear the unmistakable sounds of metal clanking, and you spot signs of a disturbance, well, check your six. Look in that garbage can, because you never can tell. The GCDs may be loose in your town.